Agendas for study sessions, including concept reviews, can be found by visiting Broomfield's website at broomfield.org. Our agenda this evening includes 2 study session items. Seeing there are no concept reviews on the agenda this evening, we will not be taking any public comment. You can watch the study session live on Channel 8 and through video streaming on broomfield.org/council meetings. For our hard of hearing residents present, we have wireless headsets available in the back of the council chambers through our AV team. Our first item this evening is an update on the status of the Baseline Development Project from Kyle Harris of Realberry, formerly McWhinney Real Estate, and General Manager for the Baseline Development. Before we hear the update, I'd like to remind Council that the Center Street and Raleigh Park projects are in the development review process, meaning an application for a final plat and site development plans have been submitted. So this matter is in the quasi-judicial status. For the public, that means tonight's presentation is a time for Council and the community to hear the developer's update. It's not a concept review where Council gives feedback on proposed design and uses, and it's not a formal hearing where Council makes a decision on the submitted land use applications. As the judge on land use applications, Council is restricted from having conversations or making a decision about these projects until their formal hearings. The hearings on these applications are currently scheduled for January 27th and February 24th. Further information on quasi-judicial proceedings can be found on the city's website. Mr. Harris, would you please start us off? Come up to the podium and provide us with your update.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of council. It's great to be up here, and thank you guys for giving us an opportunity to provide an update on Baseline. Let's go to the next slide if we could, please. Since we do have a few new faces on council, congratulations to our new council members. We wanted to take an opportunity at the outset to provide a bit of an overall, some context for Baseline, just remind folks of what the community is all about. We'll quickly pass beyond that and go to some completions, basically provide an update on where we are in the process to date. And then we're going to talk about some exciting things that are on the near-term horizon, some of which are indeed quasi-judicial. So I appreciate the comments, the cautions on what we can and cannot say about that. So next slide, please. One of the things that is very important for us, we believe that any good master plan community needs to be founded upon a set of guiding principles. For those of you who have been through these before, you know we always begin our presentation with these. Our guiding principles at Baseline are environmental stewardship, healthy living, and innovation. And this is essentially the lens through which we view our community. Next slide, please. All right, so on the entitlement side, Baseline is 1,100 acres. And on that 1,100 acres, we will be providing 172 acres of open lands of various flavors. We actually anticipate that we will probably achieve a number greater than that at full build out. We are entitled for 9,205 residential units. In full disclosure, we think we are probably more likely to be between 5,000 and 6,000 units at full build out. Again, these things are market dependent. And then we are entitled with an extremely robust 17.2 million square feet of commercial. I would love to say we're going to get that. We are not going to get that. And we're looking at we at best guess at this point between 4 and 5 million square feet of commercial at full build out. Next slide, please. All right, so wanted to give especially those new council members a sense of the overall development. So you see here our master plan. This is a little bit dated because the idea was that the areas that are shaded in sort of those earth tones are areas that are actively under development. So you see it's primarily those areas on the west side of the community. In actuality, if I had a pointer, I would direct you to the label Parkside West, which is just above 160th Avenue. That is also very much under development, and we anticipate builders going vertical on that this year. Another area sort of sandwiched between the label Raleigh Park and Alcott Road, that area has also been developed, and we anticipate housing going in that area this year as well. So and we'll talk a little bit about Center Street and some other projects, Parkside West. The idea is that by the end of this year, we anticipate all of the area to the west of what we call the Parklands, the linear park, to be either constructed or in some phase of development. Now, the idea is that we have been working our way from the west side of the community over to the east side of the community, basically incrementally building upon the infrastructure that has already been developed. That's why we're working that direction. We will talk later in this presentation about a catalytic project that will actually enable us to move sooner than we anticipated over to the east portion of the project, but more on that in just a bit. Next slide, please. One of the things that we're very excited and proud of, and this follows our environmental stewardship guiding principle, is sustainability. And I love to spend a lot of time on this slide, but I've always been told brevity is a virtue, so we'll go quickly. We are the world's actually first pollinator district, and we are doing that in conjunction with the a Butterfly Pavilion. Matter of fact, Amy Yarger of the Butterfly Pavilion is still on our design review committee, and she keeps us honest. What this means is that we are trying to increase both the absolute number and the variety of pollinators within baseline. And I'm pleased to report, based upon the most recent census that was taken earlier this year, as far as the diversity of pollinators, we are 51% higher, actually 50% higher than we were this time prior year. So it's actually working, which is really cool. Another thing that we have a certification on, we are a sustainable landscape community. That certification is given by the Associated Landscaping Contractors of Colorado. That basically means that we take a lot of care in how we work through our irrigation in this project. That involves doing things such as using purple pipe, which is essentially the reuse water. It means choosing rock mulch oftentimes in place of turf. It also means using native grasses in place of turf and choosing xeric species, very drought tolerant species. And by doing that, when we did analysis of this project versus others within our peer group, we're achieving a 51% reduction in water consumption. Now, I will say, for those in our community who are listening, we've had a few bumps in the road on that, but we are still working through this on the landscaping side, and we are very committed to continuing this sustainability regime. There are other things that we're doing, such as getting home energy rating systems of 55 or less, using green power purchasing through United Power, and so forth. Next slide, please. By the numbers, we have to date 119 acres of dedicated open lands, and more coming. 2.5 miles of trails. This is distinguished. These are not sidewalks. These are actual dedicated trails. And that number, we are excited, is going to significantly increase as we continue doing our work in the Parklands. 1 million square feet plus of commercial that has been constructed. We've got Prospect Ridge Academy, K through 12 school located on site. 1,200 plus residential units already constructed, which represents over 2,500 residences. So it's actually, when you go out there, starting to look and feel like a true community. Next slide. This slide is a little bit complicated. I think what I wanted to draw your attention to is, first of all, the diversity of housing and the diversity of builders that we have within Baseline. And so the idea was to try and get as broad a bandwidth of housing product as we possibly can to appeal to as many folks in the community. So we've got multifamily, build for rent, townhomes, paired homes, high density single family detached homes as well. What I'm pleased to be able to mention is that this coming year, we anticipate breaking ground. We're exchanging paper on a purchase and sale agreement with a group to bring a new product type, condominiums, which we have wanted to do for a long time. And that would be located where you see the 05, the little blue circle on the map. So we're hopeful that we can break ground on that this year. We also are excited that we have a purchase and sale agreement executed with Lincoln Avenue Communities to provide affordable housing in the project. And that would locate where you see the 06 on the map. And Lincoln is proposing a two-phase project, which would be upwards of 315 deed-restricted affordable houses. Next slide, please. As far as amenities, one of the things that we strive to do is ensure that we've got pocket parks that are sprinkled through the neighborhoods. We have a built-in requirement that we want everybody within 1,650 feet of a pocket park. And we have achieved that through a series of these parks throughout the community. What you see here, Checker Square and the Basin, these are located within our West Village neighborhood. Next slide, please. And then Parkside West, we have what we call the Quad. Now, a more regional infrastructure improvement is the Big Green, which you see on the left, and more on that in just a bit. Next slide, please. And then also another pocket park is the Little Green, which has playground facilities. And then something that you probably recall us talking about in the past is this VUNERF, which is our community, our shared community street. It actually exists now, and it's really cool lit up at night. And this is a street that is not designed to put the pedestrian first, and this links up a number of the parks in Parkside West. Next slide, please. All right, so coming attractions, reference is already made to Rally Park. That'll be heard by council on February the 24th. Also on the 24th, Center Street, a project that we have, it's been a long time coming. We're very excited to be bringing that before council. Project Oak, a new project, a medical facility that we're also very excited about that is going to be coming on the 17th. I think that's concept review. And then another project on the east portion of the project is Trailmark West, and more on that in just a bit. All right, so I think with that, this may be where we're going to do a fly-through. So the origin of this fly-through, we'd had a request from some of our builders who said, hey, some of our potential buyers are having difficulty understanding where the neighborhoods relate to the other coming amenities within the community. So we did this fly-through to try and show that relationship. And we thought this would be helpful for council as well. You see Rally Park in the foreground. This is what is coming. Sport courts, including basketball with a skate loop surrounding it, picnic facilities in the center, and then what we have is a regional play facility designed for kids of all ages, including a rock climbing wall facility. So Mike's going to tell you more about that in a subsequent meeting. The Big Green, as already mentioned, that currently exists. So Rally Park will be just to the south and the west of that. The VUNERF, we wanted to highlight that for potential residents. You also get a sense of the density, the overall density here at Baseline. It may not be quite what we had anticipated, but still relative to other locations within Broomfield, this is a very high density community. There you see the VUNERF with the Little Green. Here's the Quad. And as we move further toward Baseline Road, you see the Park 40. These are a multifamily. Park 40 Inkwell and Finley is build for rent. I forgot to mention that earlier. And then boom, there you go, Center Street. What you see here is Center Street as it is anticipated to look at full build out. We will not be constructing it all at once, but rather in two phases. The first phase, however, is the primary phase. The majority of the construction is anticipated to occur in that phase. You can see there is going to be a combination of different asset classes, multifamily, retail, even some office above retail. There you see this multifamily project in the foreground is anticipated to be a second phase project because we are hoping to be able to do structured parking in a subsequent phase. think you did see the call out for Whole Foods, which is anchoring the site, and we are under a lease with Whole Foods. You see the arrow going through to the existing residential, having that pedestrian connectivity both there and on Promenade, extremely important to us. And then in these next few images, what you see are sort of the architectural treatment of the area. This is to provide a sense of the vibe, what we think experiencing this is going to look like. So all of this architecture is well underway, has been submitted to the city. And so Amanda on our team will have an opportunity to walk council through this in much more detail when we come before council for that piece. All right. And now we're going to get back to the presentations of shout out to the IT group for doing that very well. We had a lot of problems with that internally. So yeah. Yeah, awesome. All right, so we'll do a next slide, please. All right, so I had made reference to a very important catalytic project for us, and this is a medical center, medical complex. It's located on what is the northeast quadrant of the community. You can see that titled Project Oak. We have been working with the folks at Project Oak now for several months. They have been a great partner with us, and they are proposing a significant medical complex, which you will hear more about in a subsequent meeting. The reason why this is so important, aside from providing best-in-class medical service to the community, it is also enabling us to construct Huron in what will be its ultimate location. So you can see that as the highlighting in yellow. Currently, Huron Street goes straight up from 160th, bisects the UC Health Park property, and goes right to Baseline Road. This project will enable us to create what, again, is the ultimate location for Huron. And in so doing, it also opens up a significant portion of Baseline, especially that whole east side of the property, at a pace which is much accelerated from where we thought it was going to be. We always knew we were going to relocate Huron, but we're talking about accelerating plans on the east side anywhere from even 8 to 10 years beyond or earlier than where we anticipated doing it. So one of the impacts of that, you'll see this neighborhood, this development called Trailmark West, which is immediately to the west of Project Oak. If you can go to the next slide, please. So Project Oak is one of those areas that we are now very much seriously under in master planning on this. It is anticipated to be a commercial district. So think, well, I'll just be blunt. Sales tax generation is important for the city. It is important for us. We believe there's a great opportunity for that. The plan that you see here was done in conjunction with our brokers, and so it is based upon some knowledge of who is actually in the market right now and what the potential could be for having some of these tenants and some of these buildings to be constructed. I would mention that this is still a conceptual plan, even though it has been through several iterations with our brokers. And so I do anticipate some tweaks to occur. It needed to be different from Center Street. If it was more of the same, we would be cannibalizing one area versus the other. So you'll notice it is different. Whereas Center Street might be described as a bit more bespoke, this is perhaps a little more of what you might anticipate seeing in a suburban environment, but we still try to incorporate elements of placemaking into this plan. And so we still wanted to have walkability. Probably the most obvious example of that is that this development is located on the linear park. It's on the parkland. So we did not want to turn our back to the park, but rather embrace that and ensure that there is connectivity between the park and this future development. So I believe that is what we had to show as our overview. As always, we on the, I was going to say McWinney team, I'm still getting used to it too. The Real Berry team are still, we very much appreciate the partnership that we've had with staff and with council. So again, thank you guys very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris and team. Yeah, that's a big rebranding, but you can handle it. Well, I will go to my council colleagues for questions and comments and feedback. Well, we're not really doing feedback. I don't know. More questions, I guess. Who would like to start us off? Councilmember McKenzie.
Okay, thank you. I don't see the timer. Oh, there it is. Okay. A couple questions. Thanks, Kyle. The first one is some residents noticed that the buzz in the dog park were in the recent deck. Are these amenities still planned, or where they would be located and how they fit into the current phasing?
That is a good question. And I don't know if we have the ability to put the plan back up.
Can you, do you know which slide?
I would probably do the map perhaps. That might be
Can get it back up.
slide. Maybe it was 5. It was one of the early ones.
Let's get it back.
I'm thinking that might be the best.
See, magic.
Yeah. So when the Butterfly Pavilion indicated that they were not going to be able to make the relocation to baseline, that enabled some rethinking as to where the buzz would potentially locate. And so we had it previously located where you see the big green. It was nestled up just to the north of that. We have reconsidered that and are now looking at a location which, if you can see where the label says Finley, and I believe that's 100 and what's that road? Oh, I should know that. 167th. 167th. Hello, look at this all the time. 167th, where that comes in. We're now looking at the possibility of moving the buzz and the dog park and the community gardens over into that location. We are not showing it there yet because another thing that we have done is we've engaged a group called First Service to do an analysis of what is it going to cost to maintain and operate this facility. We've had experiences elsewhere where it has been a financial drag either to the developer or to the residents. And so we have done an analysis, just got that back at the beginning of the year to figure out how best to operate this in a way that will not be a financial drag to the homeowners and such. I will be able to give you a definitive answer about the timing and when the buzz goes after we finalize our internal budget discussions later on this month.
Okay, with the recent health announcement, the UC Health, some residents are curious about the current plans for that parcel, and is it still intended for healthcare use or an alternative use?
You're referring to the existing UC Health parcel? Honestly, we do not know the status of that at this point. That's probably going to be a better question once the UC Health folks are able to present. We honestly don't know.
Okay. No, I have lots of questions. That's okay.
Go for it. You live there.
Okay, the STEM school, some residents were seeing reports indicating declining enrollment in the area. What assumptions are going into around school demand, and how confident are we that this new school will still be viable?
Declining enrollment, yes. Whereas we thought it was going to be an 1,800 student school initially, I think those estimates went down to 16, then maybe even to 12. That is a conversation that we continue to have with the folks over at Adams 12. I can't say with any certainty when that school is going to happen. I have heard from folks at Adams 12 that they do anticipate that there is going to be a need for a school somewhere in this area. I just can't say when it is going. We are holding this area for now. But realistically, if it turns out that this school is not anticipated for 10 years because of demographic considerations, I think we'll have to revisit.
In that scenario, if the market conditions change, how flexible is the plan to adapt that site to another community service?
I think all of that is to be determined.
Cool. The next bit is around the Trailmark West block, which appeared more auto-oriented than the rest. I know that it bumps up to the park on the south side. How does that design align with the pedestrian-friendly?
You're absolutely right that it is more auto-centric than other areas. We are, as you can imagine, trying to balance multiple needs. And one of the needs that we have is sales tax production, and the uses that are most likely to be able to generate that sales tax do have a requirement for parking, and there's just no other way around it. So our task, which is not necessarily an easy one, is how do you incorporate those higher more auto intensive uses in a way that still provides pedestrian connectivity, that still connects to the park. But you're absolutely right. This is more auto-centric than other areas of the community.
There have been some questions around the rebrand and to Realberry, and some are curious around the motivation. Is this reflecting a shift in strategy, such as moving from a traditional developer model toward a longer-term investment or a holding company approach?
I appreciate the question. I will start off by saying nothing has changed as far as our investments, our long-term hold, our development, staffing, all of that has remained the same. The change in branding, however, was designed to help indicate that as opposed to two successful gentlemen who started the company, we wanted to brand in a way that helps us, I guess, perform better, if you will, or at least have a better presence on the national stage. McWhinney, now Realberry, is looking to go national. We already have a national footprint, but to rebrand enables us to launch better than perhaps if we were still McWhinney. Part of that does involve funding mechanisms too, because we're also looking to launch a platform where we can source more investors on a national basis to help fund some of the equity in our projects. So there's that component as well. And so just so you know, the berry component of Realberry reflects the strawberry heritage of Chad and Troy. They cut their teeth on entrepreneurship, doing strawberry stands in Southern California. And that, through a process I won't get into here, ultimately yielded a deep interest in real estate. So that's the berry part. And then the real part at the surface reflects real estate. Of course, that's the business we are in, but also real community, real returns, real placemaking. So the Realberry is a mashup of those two ideas.
Following question. Thank you. Following question. Would this rebranding and the different types of investment it may attract affect this idea of patient capital specific to Baseline?
I don't think it is going to impact. Let me think about that, how to answer. It may be that we have some additional funding sources for some of the vertical components at Baseline, But as it relates to the long-term hold and our existing investment group on what we'll call the horizontal baseline as a whole, I do not anticipate any changes in that whatsoever.
Another question is, so I noticed the reduction, an order of magnitude reduction in the residential and commercial at the start of the deck. And given the broader economic uncertainty in the markets, right? Should residents expect any changes in phasing or the mix or delivery timelines, and what goes into that? So if there are changes, what are they contingent on?
I think you're asking about the timing related to the overall master plan and what that master plan entails, perhaps. Just want to make sure
I'm saying if the original plan was X amount of residential or Y amount of commercial, and that has reduced, should we, given the uncertainty in the market currently, expect more shifts, and what would change that? Like,
At this point, we can only provide information at a moment in time based upon the best information at hand. And so I think the numbers that I had quoted earlier about where we truly think the residential is going to go and where the commercial is going to go is based upon our best thinking and our best prognostication at this time. It is hard for me to envision the residential going lower than what I mentioned. And quite frankly, if costs stabilize and we find that we are able to afford more in, let's say on the multifamily side, structured parking, that is a huge boost to residential density. So that could actually cause us to increase the amount of residential that we anticipate. So I don't see that number shifting. And even on the commercial side, the areas that we have for commercial, when you look at this, clearly it's Center Street, the portion to, well, it's Trailmark District now, Project Oak plus Trailmark West. There's an opportunity for some more commercial immediately to the south. And then the whole Baseline Innovation District area is still to be determined as well. So I would love, and staff sometimes say, oh, good gosh, Kyle, stop talking about market conditions. But it is true. We have to be able to respond to market conditions. Who would have, by way of example, who would have thought that one of the most favored classes of real estate at this point would be retail? Everyone a number of years ago said that retail is dead. In brick and mortar retail, it's gone. It is not gone, it is back. So all I can offer is that asset classes are typically cyclical. They come in and they come out of favor and in and out of favor. What we can do is try to incorporate what is in favor at the time in a way that as closely aligns to our guiding principles as possible.
cool. Do we do any scenario analysis?
Do we run pro formas? Yes, all the time. And we do consider what it would look like under any number of scenarios. Typically, we try and quantify what our downside scenario is. So yes, we do run a variety of scenarios.
Was able to be shared or no in this? No.
Typically not. I mean, those are proprietary.
And I think the last question, the Trailmark West or by Project Oak, you said a little more of what you describe as suburban. What does that mean? I'm not sure.
It means when we see sort of medium format and larger format, in this instance, it's medium format with some inline retail. That is a typology that you typically see more in, I would say, suburban areas than if you're in downtown Denver, for example. That's all I'm getting at.
That's it for me. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Next is Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much for the presentation. Welcome back. It's been a minute since you've been here. And I appreciate the questions that Councilmember McKenzie asked you. I guess one of the first questions that I'm going to ask is, are you familiar with the community in South Jordan, Utah called Daybreak?
I am.
Okay. The reason I asked that is because I went to the National League of Cities City Summit Conference, and they did a tour of Daybreak. And one of the interesting things about their community, which is planned to be 20,000 units, is that 80% of students there bike or walk to work. And so I'm curious, do you know what those statistics would be for this community? And I do have a point with this question.
Yeah, I wish we did, but I do not know.
Okay. The reason I asked that is because I'm curious to see if the residents actually feel like that area is truly walkable, like it's safe, that they would even let their children walk or bike to, not work, school, walk or bike to school, either on their own or with their parents, doing like a bike bus thing. Because I had the opportunity to bike up towards that area for a Chamber of Commerce event. And Sheridan seemed a little too wide for kind of safe crossing, or the feeling of safety, if you kind of get my gist. And so I'm curious, as you go forward with the rest of the development of Baseline, either what lessons learned from this, what you've already developed, or what changes would you like to make so that way the community is even more or is safer for those who are not in an automobile?
It's a good question, and have to think about that a bit. I would say one thing that is going to help not solve, but help alleviate the very wide Sheridan crossing, and I agree with you. It is a very wide crossing. And we do have a grade separated crossing, so that goes underground on the, I think it's just a little bit south. So that is one opportunity to avoid that large crossing. I would say we have always strived to make our streets smaller wherever we can. In the case of Sheridan, I think Huron is going to be a similar situation in the arterials. We do not have that ability to make them smaller. I think we can work with staff to try and determine, is there a way to make, and when we talk about Sheridan and cycling, we really think more about our commuter cyclists than we do families taking their kids out on Sheridan. I would love it if it was safe enough to do that. I just don't know that that is going to happen. But the question is, what are some best in class techniques whereby you could have the biking feel a little more protected, even though it is on Sheridan on a busy arterial? And at some point, we had talked about doing some raised implements, that's the wrong term, some type of protections on raising them to offer a little more protection. I think the concern is, well, that's great, but what happens when you have to plow for snow? And so they're just these trade-offs, but I think our team would be very willing to continue a conversation to figure out if there's some best-in-class ways that we can do that we're not currently, would love to.
Well, it's not like it doesn't snow in Utah. So somehow they figured it out.
This year.
Not saying that they're the perfect model, but I think there's lessons to be learned from there. And I certainly think you should be pushing harder to make sure that those crossings of streets, the streets themselves, are pedestrian oriented and not kind of entirely auto oriented if you're going to continue to sell this development as a walkable community. And then I think my other big kind of complaint that Councilmember McKenzie pointed out is there is a lot of parking, including in the Center Street District area. I'm curious if you are designing kind of Center Street and the other trail mark, to be infilled later on down the road?
I would say maybe, and the maybe would be for Center Street, but it's hard to envision given the complexities of actually taking some of those surface parking lots, given what's already designed. I just don't want to mislead you and to say, yep, absolutely, we're just doing land banking and those in the current design that you're going to see that we can convert those to something that is going to be much more vertically oriented. Maybe in a redevelopment 20 years down the road, possibly. It's hard for me to envision an economic circumstance where that would make sense. And quite frankly, that's for both of those areas. So I think the short answer is probably not.
Okay. And then my next question is, have you had conversations with the commercial developers about what it would take for them to not require as much parking in a more suburban context?
Where it really comes down to is what is the market is what dictates that. And in the instance of commercial, it's less the developer than it is the tenant. The tenant is going to tell you how much parking they require or do not require. And if there is not enough provided, they will not lease with you. So on the one hand, we agree we want less parking. On the other hand, we also like tenants. And so there is an inevitable sort of push and pull as it relates to that. Not so dissimilar with tenants in a multifamily building as well. Unless you have a robust public transportation system like you would in a major city downtown, it is very difficult, we have found, to get tenants to lease your building if the parking is not provided.
All right. Public transit was the magic word or word.
Indeed it is.
Which I kind of figured. Now, going to the housing that's coming up on the eastern side of the properties on the one slide, it said 6 and 7 specifically. Are those income aligned housing units going to be for rent or for sale or a combination?
Yeah, do you mind, I'm trying to recall where
On
specifically.
slide, slide 8, where it says builders of baseline.
Okay, if it's Parkside West 4, and that's where we had where the 6 is located?
Yeah, 6 and 7.
Correct. So that is deed restricted. I think both phases are anticipated to be for rent. So that would be 60% average AMI.
Okay. I would really implore you to try and find at least some of those units to be for sale, because that is something we are missing in this community. And I'm happy to see that you're doing a combination of townhomes and denser single family and even now condos, which is a kind of a plus that we haven't heard before from you all. But I'd really implore you to try and find a way to make for sale income aligned housing units work in some way, shape, or form. And then my other question, in terms of housing variety type, have you guys looked at trying to implement doing like quadplexes, triplexes, sixplexes, et cetera, in that area? Or is that something you all have kind of written off the table? I know they have some issues similar to that of condos with construction defect litigation, but
You are correct. The pool of builders who are willing to do that much attached housing for exactly what you mentioned for construction defects is small. That having said, I think we have tries, quads. I'm trying to remember if it was Thrive and a few builders in West Village who have that. And Dreamfinders does as well, townhomes. So we're actively developing with those numbers of attached units in mind. So it's more than just twos and threes. And then to the point about the for sale affordable housing, you'll see the 07 at the bottom area. That is under a facilitating covenant, which basically means that we've encumbered the land for future affordable housing. That is an area that we are reserving for sale deed restricted affordable housing. And I believe the requirement there is 80% AMI. We have probably met with 5 different builders to try and figure out how to do that, have not gotten there yet. So as difficult as 6 is, 7 is even more so. But you're absolutely right, the need is there, and we're continuing to try and figure out how to deliver it.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Lim?
Thank you. I'll echo other council members' happy response to the fact that you're doing condos and also that you have a definite developer for the one part of the attainable housing section. So that's good news. What I find hard to follow and would be helpful is if we had a timeline of development. I know I looked at the presentation, you have some kind of disclaimer at the end that, all this may change kind of thing. So, I respect the fact that a timeline is subject to change, but it would be helpful to me anyway, if we had, this comes first, this comes next, and this is the relative time frame in which these developments are going to happen. You kind of hit and miss, kind of told us this piece is going to happen then, and it would be helpful if we're all synced.
Fair enough. I think we even had a timeline in a prior version of this for Center Street, but because of the quasi judicial, I think we needed to take that out. But if I can, and I'm sure somebody will tell me if I can't, as it relates to the things that are coming, we anticipate Center Street, and Amanda will talk more about this when she presents, but we anticipate breaking ground on that this summer. As it relates to Raleigh Park, Mike will tell us that we are looking to break ground on that April of this year. And then I'm not sure I should hazard a guess on Oak right now, but it'll be probably next year. And we'll just leave it at that. As it relates to the condos, assuming we are able to get the PSA executed, which we hope to, we were hoping by the end of this month, it might be beginning of next month, because all of the facilitating infrastructure is already in place. Assuming we're able to get that project through the city's process expeditiously, and I have no reason to think that we wouldn't, there is a fighting chance of getting groundbreaking on that yet this year, but that could slip to next year. Oh, and then as to the affordable housing, we have an outside closing date of November of 2028, which you might gasp at that and say, oh, good gosh, that is forever from now. The reality is that they have to go through the CHFA process just like everybody else does. So one of the things that we're doing is working with Lincoln to make it as attractive a CHFA project as possible.
Okay. And then the Trailmark West section, what time frame do you put that in?
I would probably put that on the same time frame as Oak, which means ideally breaking grounds on that. Yes, I'm gonna get kicked over here. So
Gonna say.
first or second quarter of next year.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. I think the rest of my questions were asked. This is not specific to the development, but just the community. We had questions in the past about the how the Metro District representation was going in the community. So I'd like to hear, do you have insight into that from your perspective? Obviously, the developer sits on almost all the boards. Are we moving in the direction of the residents in your estimation?
We are, and the one that is what we call the residential metro district, I want to say it's District 3. But again, that one, we have homeowners who serve on that board.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
All right, thank you. Next is Councilmember Anderson.
All right, thank you. And I just have to say that flyover was so helpful to start to really see what's coming. And I know some of it, this is gonna be hard because some of the questions I would have would be, have to wait. But even just to see like Raleigh Park, like mixing in there and bringing something more than residential and commercial is very, very exciting. Okay, so on the timeline, and I don't know if you can also include these, because I think this is gonna have to come into the next meeting, but some of the Colorado 7 and Huron realignment timeline for those projects, I think that might be, I don't know if you can share anything on timing for those, or if that should wait till the next meeting.
I would just say similarly, the timeline for Project Oak and Trailmark West and the Huron relocation, all of those are related projects. So they would occur on a similar timeline.
Okay, that is helpful. Okay, and then there's Councilmember Ward had asked about the resident concerns related to the Sheridan Boulevard crossing. And I'll just say that is one of the top things that I hear from residents who live on the west side of Baseline is, I know there's the underpass and they can go down there, but if you're biking, that's great. But if you're walking, they really want to cross at Sheridan. They don't want to have to go all the way down and back up again. And so just like, it's already in your minds, and considering what we can do to improve that crossing as this development moves forward. That's probably the main thing that I've, the repetitive thing that I've heard from residents. And as far as, okay, this gets a little complicated because Thunder Vista is currently closed due to fire damage, but right now my understanding is the residents moving in on the east side of Sheridan are being bused over to Thunder Vista. Is that, are they going to a different school now? Is that still, what is the plan? Do we have a plan for?
I
where they're headed?
apologize.
Oh, that's okay.
I don't know the answer to that question. I just knew that there was the fire and
Oh, no, not related to the fire, just when when we get back on track, and they're at 4 different schools right now. So
Oh my goodness.
when Thunder Vista reopens, is the plan for K-8 for people moving into Baseline to attend Thunder Vista? Is that still the plan, or?
I
we-
believe so. And I believe when the STEM school, assuming that the demand is there and it gets constructed, I think that was going to be a choice in school.
Yeah, that's my understanding too. And then so do you know if the plan is to continue to bus anyone on the east side of Sheridan moving into Baseline, they would still get bus service to Thunder Vista?
I
Is that-
apologize. I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, that kind of comes back to that crossing. I think they're gonna keep busing them, but we'll maybe find out more details there. And then has there been any discussion of the underpass under Colorado 7? Is that still in the works? Possible?
I see a shaking of heads affirmatively. So, yes.
Okay, so it's kind of down by the Huron Street relocation. Okay, that's still being thought about. Okay, that's helpful.
Oh, yeah. And that's, sorry, that is, sorry. Hello. Yeah, that is part of, there's a massive drainage work that is being done, as well as the regional trail and the below grade crossing of Highway 7. All of that is part of the work that's being done on the Oak, Huron, and Trailmark projects.
Okay, perfect. Glad that's still being considered. And is it like a likely component of it, or is it still just consideration?
I think it's going to happen.
Yeah, okay, that's okay. That's good news. And then I hear some of my colleagues' concerns about the Trailmark West and more parking and more of that suburban feel. But was part of the reason for that that location? It's it's not that far off of I-25 and Colorado 7. So it's part of the consideration to try to keep that on the outskirts of the development. Was that part of the reason why it's up there, or?
That is correct. I mean, that's the best logical location for a commercial development because of the proximity to Highway 7 and the proximity to I-25.
Okay, and then that would actually This is super exciting too. I was always expecting the movement to go south into some of those properties, and there's still work being done on some of that area. Is there
Correct.
anything you can share about, anything right off?
We've got some bubble diagrams, but nothing that's appropriate to share just yet.
Okay, but then, so it's kind of moving in both directions right now then, but more to the east. Okay.
Correct.
All right, and then this is really minor, but just want to flag this. Here's another thing, actually, this is probably the thing I've heard more from residents is when you're driving on Sheridan Parkway, and you take a left onto Preble Creek. So you're coming up from the south, taking a left right by the school. Those plantings there, all that grass seriously blocks that left-hand turn. So just, it might be really wise to remove some of those grasses from that corner, because that is a little bit of a hazard. And that is all I have for today. The rest of I'll save for the next meeting, but very exciting progress. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be quick. Most of my questions have been asked, but I wanted to clarify on the affordable housing. I appreciate the time frame. I was interested in that, but I wanted to reiterate, Councilmember Ward, if there's any way to get affordable for purchase, I know that's hard, that would be fantastic. One example of that is a partnership with Habitat for Humanity. I know they've met with you. I don't know if that's a possibility. An example that comes to mind is ARIA development on Federal, if you're familiar with that, but it's Federal and 44th in Denver, which is much smaller development, but it's a mix of very much the high-end rentals and apartments plus a Habitat community right in it. And that's a way to get affordable purchase. So I would encourage you to, if that's not already been explored, maybe that's an option, because I think the council member is right. That's a big gaping hole in our housing stock that we really need to have homes that are affordable for purchase. I'll put a plug in for parking. I love it when there's enough parking. If there's not enough parking, I go somewhere else. But if you can make it covered, let's do that. It still gets caught there. And the last question, because we've seen a lot of activity on Lark Ridge across the highway. I think Wynn's grocery store is coming in. There's another couple businesses are rolling in. So I'll just ask you tongue in cheek, but have you been talking to Aldi?
We are aware that they are looking at a major expansion within Colorado.
We'd like to have one of them, be nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there any other first round questions from my colleagues before we go to second round? Seeing no takers, we'll go back to you, Councilmember McKenzie.
Thanks. You mentioned, last one. You mentioned that Raleigh Park is in April, breaking ground. When do we expect a range of that to be finished? Because I have a group of residents who want to play ball.
All right. Well, I don't know if we can phase the basketball courts to go in first, but my
much.
understanding is that the entirety of that, and I'm going to look to Mike, that's before the end of the December 27th for the whole thing? Oh, 20, sorry. Yes. Not 26. Okay, summer 27. I'll see if we can, yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Some people want to know, huh? I love it. All right. Any other questions from my colleagues? I don't see any. So thank you so much for the update and the letting us know the new changes and what's coming up. We look forward to what's next.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys and appreciate the really good questions.
Thank you all. Our next item this evening provides an update on the City and County of Broomfield's long-term water supply strategy. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to begin the discussion.
Thank you. And making their way up is Ken Rutt, Director of Water Utilities, and Mark Laurie, our newly appointed Deputy of Water Utilities. It's been I don't think there's a day that goes by, or if it does, it is a rarity that we are not, as a crew, discussing water. Before we jump into that, just for the community's information and new council members, for our catalytic developments, so you may ask why all developers are not invited quarterly to come and provide an update, but our
catalytic developments, which Baseline, or I should say Real Berry, AKA Baseline.
It's
be-
still baseline.
Still Baseline. We're just trying to acclimate, Kyle, as quickly as we can, so we're hip and we're using the right terminology. Broomfield Town Square, that developer is coming next week, and then, of course, Flatiron. So we'll continue with that path for the catalytic developments, even if there isn't any progress or movement. We bring those developers in so the council and the community get a up-to-date perspective on what's coming next. So thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, for asking about the timeline. Thank you for sharing, Kyle. That's always, everyone's chomping at the bit on those timelines, so we appreciate it very much. Mr. Rutt, the floor is yours.
Well, good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, Council, and City Manager. Ken Rutt, Director of Water Utilities. It's always exciting to come before you and talk about water and share where we're at. And tonight, you know, even though the council memo was roughly 23 pages long and gave you a lot of information, tonight we want to focus in on these 7 key points. Is you know, engaging council, what is it going to look like throughout our water updates in 2026? Give you a little bit more background on our water utilities, charting a course for 2050, and overview of our water sources and water supply facilities, our drought response action and potential implementation for 2026, Colorado River update, which is an ongoing changing event, and then the potential sale of a water utility property called the Becky property. Next slide, please. So as we said, water is the cornerstone of our community and welfare. And staff, along with City and Council, Broomfield Councils over the years, have strategically invested in a diverse portfolio of water rights and resources. This proactive approach is being implemented to ensure a reliable and sustainable water supply capable of supporting our anticipated population and economic growth through the year 2050. So tonight we really want to key into the overview of water resources and water supply facilities, our drought response actions, potential implementation in 2026, Colorado River update, and in addition to tonight, staff is also planning on building on tonight's presentation at our April 21st quarterly enterprise update, followed with potential drought consideration of a drought declaration for May 12th, 2026, and then follow up again in July 2021 with another quarterly update with some more information on Great Western Reservoir. Next slide. So one of the things we want to talk a little bit about is setting the stage, is creating, you know, charting the course. What is Broomfield's Water Department 2050 water, future water looks like? You know, charting that course for success and sustainability. And it all begins with what we've been working on as a cooperative across from the city manager's office through and council participated in the overall vision of the city's strategic planning. And that's courageously delivering results together. And that's what this is about. Water Utility Department 2050. And the overarching umbrella of that is the One Water concept that we kicked off in the fall of 2025. And all of these points on this slide, you know, One Water, it shows the interconnectedness of the water, the comprehensive approach to the integration of taking water from the source through our treatment facilities, through our distribution, all the way through wastewater, and then back through reuse. And how do we do that efficiently and remove those silos to make us more effective? And one of the things we talk about in our staff meetings, particularly this morning, was, you know, envisioning a tree next to a stream. And the city's strategic planning documents the foundation from which we grow is the roots. that is taking in the nutrients. And then the trunk of that tree is the Water Utilities Department as a whole. And then each branch, major branch, is one of the 9 branches or 9 divisions of the Water Utility Department. And as a tree functions, you have nutrients and water being uptake and carbon dioxide, oxygen being exchanged in the downside. And so that's similar to what we're trying to envision as a one water utility is how do we function and organize and operate in that cohesive manner between all of them. And so everybody functioning together to achieve the overall vision. Optimizing efficiency, advancing technology, sustainability, financial affordability and access, climate resilience, and engagement. Next slide. So one of the things that we are required to do is the water efficiency plan. This needs to be updated by April 2027 under state requirements, which is about every 7 years we are required to update this plan. And so that's one of those planning documents that we've been working on and will continue to work on through 2026 and get adoption in 2027. It identifies new conservation programs for Broomfield and update our water use forecasts based on input from community development, engineering, legal, finance, and how we work together to make those projections and forecasts. Water resource master plan. One of the major ones we just kicked off here last week was building on the Great Western evaluation from when the consultant came out almost 2 years ago now. And how's that fit into the One Water, the water efficiency plan update, and how's that all fit into the new master plan that will be developed and updated? Should be actually an updated master plan by 2027. And so tonight you'll hear, following me here, next slide please, is Mark Laurie, our Deputy Director, will get into more of the details as he walks you through the rest of this presentation. So Mark.
Thank you, Ken. Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and members of council. I'm going to go through a bunch of different things here, and hopefully we'll give you some useful information for some of the water stuff coming down the road. So I wanted to start with an overview of our water sources and water facilities. I know some of you have probably heard this multiple times, but it's always good to level set and kind of refresh where we are and where we're getting our water and how it works in our system. So this is a Google Earth image with the Continental Divide, Rocky Mountain National Park along the left side, Broomfield outlined in light blue in the lower right. So our main potable water sources are the Colorado Big Thompson Project, as it's known, which its main features is Lake Granby on the west side of Rocky Mountain National Park, and Carter Lake west of Berthoud. So you see Lake Granby marked on the map there. Windy Gap Project, which is a very similar system to the Colorado Big Thompson. The water comes also from the upper Colorado River and is delivered through the same facility. It's just a different set of water rights. And the Windy Gap Project actually piggybacks on the CBT system and relies on excess capacity and all of that infrastructure. So it's stored in much of the same reservoirs and delivered in the same pipelines and relies on that extra capacity. And then Denver Water, we buy treated water from Denver Water. I don't show that on the map, but that comes straight into our distribution pipe network from Denver straight into our city's pipe network. The water from both Colorado Big Thompson and Windy Gap, those are delivered more or less as the arrows are shown here. So the blue arrow, it comes under Rocky Mountain National Park, down through some other pipelines, down to Carter Lake. And then there is a pipeline from Carter Lake to our Glasser Reservoir, which is right next to our water treatment plant. So a lot of infrastructure required to get that water here. There's a couple other features on the map, the Becky property and Height Pit. I'll talk about those a little bit more a little later. Next slide, please. So it's important to kind of distinguish between, but then also talk about how our two main water systems are very much interconnected. So we have Broomfield has a potable water system where we get all of our drinking water. And then we have a wastewater reuse or reclaimed water system that is used to irrigate a lot of our parks and HOA common areas and such. But the two of them are very much connected and they kind of influence each other. And it's important that we sort of track all this and kind of understand it in an integrated way to do our long-term planning. So for the potable water system, it starts with those water sources, the Colorado Big Thompson and the Windy Gap project I mentioned as raw water delivery or untreated water that comes down to our treatment plant. It's treated there at the plant up on 144th Avenue, goes into the potable distribution system, the pipes that bring all the water to our homes and to our businesses. As I mentioned earlier, Denver Water is treated water that comes straight into that pipe network. So then obviously that pipe system delivers all the water to our residents and businesses for drinking and showering and cooking and irrigation. Only a portion of the water that is used in our homes and businesses is actually reusable under our water rights, as well as much of the water, probably a little over the half of the water that we supply, potable water we supply, is used outdoors for lawn and tree and garden irrigation. So it's usually 50 to 55%. So that water that goes out for irrigation never returns to the sewer collection system, never comes to the wastewater plant, and is not available for reuse. Of the water that does get to the wastewater treatment plant, the percentage varies, but only some of that water is reusable by us under our water rights. There's only certain kinds of water that are actually reusable under our water rights. So it goes to wastewater treatment. It gets another level of treatment before it goes to reuse pumping. I don't show Great Western Reservoir on this diagram, but during the winter, the reuse pumping, treatment and pumping is actually pumping up to the reservoir in the winter. And then during the summer, we pull water out of that reservoir as well as pump, again, reuse water from the wastewater plant. Most of that's used, as I mentioned, for parks, HOAs, and other large properties. On average, it varies a little bit from year to year, but we reuse about 700 million gallons of water. About 18% of our total supply each year we were able to reuse, given our water rights in this infrastructure. Next slide, please. So the potable sources I mentioned earlier, Windy Gap, Colorado Big Thompson, and CBT. Currently, CBT is short for Colorado Big Thompson. Currently, most of our water comes from CBT and Denver Water, the CBT water rights in that Colorado Big Thompson project and Denver Water. Windy Gap provides only a small portion, maybe something like 10%. I didn't label it there, but it's probably less than 10%. As we grow, and I'm going to talk about why coming up here in a couple minutes, as we grow, the Windy Gap project and the Windy Gap water rights will become a larger and larger share. So most of the additional water use or additional water demand that comes as we grow over the next 20 years is going to come from that Windy Gap project. You'll also see a little sliver of green on the top of the right chart. Last year, we finished a water court case, or actually it was 2 years ago now, we finished a water court case to be able to use our shares in what's known as the Frico Marshall system, which is essentially community ditch, one of the main ditches that comes right through town. So we own some shares in that system, and we're going to be able to start using that water for our water supply. We'll probably start doing that a little bit this summer and testing how it fits into our system. So the last point I wanted to make about all this is between the Colorado Big Thompson project, which is almost entirely Colorado River water, the Windy Gap project, which is almost entirely Colorado River water, and then Denver Water, their system varies. I don't know all the details, but they get a lot of their water from the Colorado River. So at least on an annual basis, about 75% of our water comes from the Colorado River. So obviously that's relevant to a lot of things that are going on today, and we'll touch on some of that here in a little bit. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk about Chimney Hollow Reservoir. This is a new project that we've been working with other regional partners in Northern Water over the last construction over the last 3 or 4 years, and in the planning going back, I think, almost 20 years. I mentioned that Windy Gap project kind of piggybacks on the Colorado Big Thompson project, and so it relies on excess capacity in that project. So it relies on excess storage space in Lake Granby and some of the other reservoirs, and it relies on excess capacity in the tunnels and pipelines that bring CBT water from the west slope to the east slope. So the downside of that is that there isn't always available excess capacity in those reservoirs and in those systems. So a lot of times we can't get any water from Windy Gap because there's no place to put it. So Chimney Hollow is meant to solve that very problem. If you're familiar with Carter Lake, which is just into the foothills west of Berthoud, west of Loveland, Chimney Hollow Reservoir is literally just up and over the ridge from Carter Lake. I think I measured it, and it's like 700 yards or something like that between the two shorelines. Very, very close. Construction of the project is basically complete. The dam is at its full height. The construction contractor has been given their what they call substantial completion, so they've demobilized by and large almost all of the work is done and they're just doing minor touch-ups, minor little follow-up items now. As you've probably heard, over the last year, Northern Water, the entity that leads this development, they discovered naturally occurring mineralized uranium is in the rock that was used to build the dam. That rock was quarried on site. The uranium was not detected until they found uranium levels in some of the stormwater runoff from the site. The issue is that since that's in the rock that was used to build the dam, when we fill the reservoir, that uranium is going to dissolve into the water in the reservoir, and it's going to cause levels of uranium in the water that need to be mitigated in some way before we start using the reservoir. Currently, Broomfield's raw water before treatment and in our treated water has non-detectable levels of uranium in it. We are working with Northern Water very closely, looking at a couple of different mitigation options that will essentially maintain that. We will certainly stay in compliance with CDPHE regulations around uranium, which is 30 parts per billion, if you're interested in the numbers around that. And we're actually aiming to keep our uranium levels in our treated water as close to zero as possible where it is now. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about our reuse system. So the water sources for the reuse system are essentially the wastewater from the other waters we use because it's a wastewater reuse system. So it primarily includes Windy Gap, CBT, and Marshall. It's mostly Windy Gap. So it's wastewater effluent associated with our Windy Gap water rights and our Windy Gap deliveries that we get now. We also have some raw water sources. In particular, we own some shares in Church Ditch, which is a ditch that diverts off of Clear Creek and comes down through Golden and Arvada. And we pump that water into Great Western Reservoir usually in the spring. I wanted to talk a little bit about CBT. This sets up some issues that we'll be bringing back to council later in the year. So CBT is not usually a reusable water source. Most cities don't reuse it and aren't allowed to reuse it. This is because of the nature of the federal contracts to build that project and then the contract that each allottee in the CBT system has with Northern Water. That water is not legally reusable. We do have a special agreement with Northern that will allow us to reuse some of our CBT effluent if and only if we replace the return flows that would have accrued to the South Platte River if we hadn't reused that effluent. So the idea with the CBT project is that it's supposed to benefit as many farmers and cities as possible. So they wanted the return flows to go back into the river, and then that would be available for other water rights holders downstream for irrigation or for municipal uses. So, and to, if we're going to reuse some of that CBT water, then we have to replace it one for one downstream. Hype Pit, which you've heard about a few times over the last few years. We haven't brought that before you in any major way yet, as I recall. That's a gravel pit out along the South Platte River near Fort Lupton that Broomfield owns. We've owned it for, I think, coming up on 20 years. And the idea there is it's a gravel pit, so it's a big hole in the ground. Not all the gravel's been excavated out and used for construction. The idea is that we can use that to store some other water rights we own on the South Platte River, and that will be the source of water we use to replace the CBT return flow. So in essence, if we build out Hype Pit, that will increase the capacity of the reuse system by something like 30% a year. And will allow us to be a little more secure and a little more resilient on that system. Ken mentioned that we're going to come back to you later this year with an update on Great Western Reservoir, and we do think of Great Western and Hype Pit as maybe being an either or kind of thing, and we'll talk more about that, I think, in the months ahead. Next slide. Okay, despite an inch of snow the other day, we're still thinking things are not looking terribly good. So we wanted to update you guys on what we're thinking about drought for this year and sort of refresh everybody on what our drought procedures look like. So under the Water Use and Drought Ordinance passed by Council in 2024, drought stages 1, 2, or 3, all of which carry mandatory water use restrictions for all residents and businesses, those have to be approved by City Council. Typically, the first step for us is going to be to declare a drought watch, and that can be declared by staff, would be approved by city manager. So the procedure that we set up, the way we've done this, we've been doing it for the last couple of years, and this looks like it's the first year we're really going to implement it, is staff monitors conditions, in particular through the winter. So we're watching snowpack, where almost all of our water supply comes from. And we're looking at National Weather Service and other NOAA forecasts of what kind of stream flow there's going to be, what kind of water supply there's going to be. if things look like they might be dry, they might require at the very least a drought update for council, if not a potential drought declaration. We'll schedule an agenda item for council in the spring. The spring is key because for that Colorado Big Thompson project, the board that oversees Northern Water and oversees that project, they set a quota every year, and it comes in 2 phases. So they do part of it in the fall, and then they update the quota in the spring. So in April, usually we know how much water we're going to have, from that project, and how much water we're going to have in general for the year. So then we'll know whether we've got some risk of shortages that year, and that's when we'll decide to bring that to council. Yes, like I said, council consideration of drought stage 1, 2, or 3, all of which require mandatory water use restrictions. Drought stage 1 presumably would always be the first one we go to. That would take, the main restriction it would impose is that lawn irrigation would go from 3 days a week to no more than 2 days per week. Drought stage 2 brings it down to 1 day per week, and under drought stage 3, we by and large prohibit turf irrigation throughout the city, except some key parks and things like that. Next slide, please. So in terms of current conditions, the left side of this chart says that snowpack is about 40% below average as of December 30th. We took a look at this again yesterday. It's a little worse now. It's approaching 45% below normal. There really hasn't been much snow in the last few weeks. So our current plan is, if we don't get a pretty dramatic change in conditions here over the next few weeks, we're planning to recommend a drought watch to City Manager Hoffman to start in the first week of February. A drought watch is really mostly a communication and sort of awareness raising tool. We would step up our communications around that. And it really just asks for voluntary reductions in water use. As I mentioned, the Northern Water Board will set the final quota, the final supply from the Colorado Big Thompson project. That meeting is on April 10th. If I'm remembering that right, it's right around there. So we'll know shortly after that what it says quota 70%, greater or less than 70%. 70% is normal. You don't really need to know what that number is, but if we get a normal supply from Colorado Big Thompson project, we'll probably be fine for the rest of 2026. If they decide to set a lower supply, a lower quota, then we'll have a little bit more worry about the risks. So if the quota is lower, we will go forward with a presentation and an update to council. You're going to get an update on conditions at the enterprise update on April 21st. And then we have scheduled an agenda item for you to consider on May 12th, which would be the drought declaration recommendation. So if conditions are worsened by then, if the supply we're going to get from the CBT system is less than normal, we will go forward with potentially recommending a drought declaration stage 1 on May 12th. If the quota is normal or above, which is possible for various reasons, then at the very least, we'll give you an update in April, and then we would likely cancel that May event where you would otherwise decide on a drought declaration. Next slide, please. So Ken mentioned that we would be coming back in April at the enterprise update and giving you a more detailed update on how we do our drought, how we evaluate what our drought risks are, how we evaluate whether we have enough supply for future growth projections, how much growth we could accommodate. We wanted to give you a quick summary of that here tonight, and then we'll provide more detail in April. So a few things I wanted to hit home with this. One, we do look at this from multiple different angles. So it's not, in the past, a lot of times water providers would look at a fairly simple scenario of just looking at historic conditions. And if we can meet future demand given historic conditions in rivers and in weather, then we're probably fine. Climate change throws that out the window. We know that conditions are changing in ways that are a little bit hard to predict. And so one of the solutions to that is to just look at it from lots of different angles, looking at different scenarios, which we heard as a question earlier on one of the items, looking at different growth projections, looking at different supply projections. We've done quite a bit of that over the last 3 or 4 years. We do feel that our existing water sources and facilities are sufficient to meet our growth through 2050 under droughts similar to those we've experienced in the past. So the main drought that people point to is the 2002 drought, or it was kind of a 2002 to 2004 drought sequence. With a drought of that magnitude, our existing sources and facilities would be sufficient for our 2050 growth. As I mentioned, climate change raises the specter of much more severe events. We do have some information from the state water plan suggesting changes in water availability and water supply in the Colorado River and elsewhere There's a lot of uncertainty around that. Not a lot of that has been boiled down to local individual projects and river basins and facilities. And so more of that work needs to be done to understand how it affects those individual projects and facilities. And we're closely watching all that, gathering whatever information we can find and coordinating with our partners to try to accelerate some of that. Colorado River, which is related to climate change in some ways, also creates additional uncertainty. I'll talk about that in a moment. So yeah, we're continuing to gather as much information as we can to understand these risks, and all those planning efforts that Ken mentioned earlier, our One Water initiative, our water efficiency planning, and in particular, this master planning effort, which we kicked off just over the last few days, is going to help us better understand some of these risks and better identify solutions that'll guard against them in the future. Next slide, please. Okay, the Colorado River. This is perhaps the most complicated thing we think about. So the issues around the Colorado River date back to the Interstate Compact of 1922. This is an agreement among the 7 states and actually ratified by Congress. There's a bunch of these compacts for water around the country. This is probably the most famous one these days. And then there are a bunch of other court decisions and smaller compacts among some of the subsets of states, a treaty with Mexico, a whole bunch of other things that sort of govern how the Colorado River is managed and how the water is allocated. But the main thing is that it divides the basin, the compact divides the basin into an upper basin and a lower basin, more or less split at the Utah-Colorado border, Utah-Arizona border. The upper basin states are Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, and New Mexico, and the lower basin of Nevada, Arizona, and California. It more or less allocates the river between those 2 groups of states somewhat equally. It's 8.5 million acre feet per year for the lower basin states and 7.5 million acre feet per year for the upper basin states. There are a whole bunch of other requirements in the compact. And one of the key things is that the upper basin and the lower basin don't agree on what the compact means. And so if it comes to a point where probably particularly the lower basin wants to enforce the compact, that will almost certainly trigger litigation. All of this is driven by the fact that since roughly 2000, there has been a prolonged drought and steadily declining flow in the river. So the basin allocates an amount of water that we have not seen on the river for probably 30 or 35 years, and no one really believes is going to be the average condition on the river going forward. Combine that prolonged drought with combined with frequent overuse by the lower basin states, so they have often used more than their allocation. We've seen water levels and storage in Lakes Powell and Meade, the nation's 2 largest reservoirs, decline pretty dramatically since the year 2000. So the chart on the bottom shows you Lake Meade in orange and Lake Powell in blue. The dotted lines on the top are their full capacity. And these charts show how much below capacity they are. So they dropped in particular during that drought event that we talked about in the early 2000s, but they've been steadily declining almost uniformly since then. They're in slightly better condition today than they were 2 or 3 years ago. But with snowpack shaping up the way it is around most of the Intermountain West, that's probably not going to improve over the next year. Next slide, please. So I'm sure you've all seen some of this in the media. The states have been negotiating new operational rules. So they're not going to renegotiate the compact itself. They're not going to touch the compact. But there are other rules that sort of lay on top of the compact that dictate how shortages are allocated. They are negotiating new rules around that. The existing rules expire essentially now. They've missed several self-imposed deadlines, but they are actively negotiating pretty regularly. I think they were sort of sequestered in some secret location last week, continuing to negotiate. Colorado's position pretty well aligned with the other upper basin states. Our representative in the negotiations, Becky Mitchell, has really been doing a great job to represent our interests and represent our position. The state's position is that the reservoir storage problem is caused primarily by overuse in the lower basin states. And second, that, and this is really critical, that upper basin states, in particular Colorado, we don't have any reservoirs that are even remotely the size of Lake Powell and Meade. So when snowpack is low, we curtail our uses. Water rights don't come into priority. And so whether it's cities, irrigators, whatever the case may be, they're curtailed automatically by just the way we manage water rights in Colorado. So as Becky Mitchell from the state likes to say, we live within our means. We don't have these big checking accounts that we can draw from when there are shortages like the lower basin. That said, they are negotiating. I don't know that there will be a huge compromise by the Upper Basin. They are holding very firm to this position, but obviously a compromise solution will have some give and take somewhere. There's a federally imposed deadline of February 14th. That's a pretty hard deadline because of the fact that the new rules need to be in place by next year and just the sequence of things that have to happen around federal decision-making processes. That February 14th deadline is pretty hard. So we should hear something on February 14th here in a few weeks or shortly thereafter. If there is not an agreement, there is a greater chance of what they call a compact call, which is essentially the lower basin seeking to enforce the compact and the allocations in the compact. As I mentioned, they don't agree at all on what the language of the compact really requires of the upper and lower basins. So that will almost certainly trigger lengthy litigation and it would probably go very quickly to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court would probably appoint what they call a water master, which is a very funny term. But this is a person who's supposed to have both legal and technical expertise to help the states reach a sort of mediated solution. So it's really kind of a lot, very much up in the air in terms of how this is going to play out and what the solutions are going to be. We will hopefully have more information to update you at that update in April. Next slide, please. Okay, taking a bit of a left turn. So enough of the drought and Colorado River stuff. We did want to give you an update about this property because we are actively engaged in some discussions about potentially selling it. So on the map on the lower right, you see Broomfield again outlined in light blue. And then straight to the north, the pink pin says Becky property. So that's a property that we acquired in the year 2000, primarily for the water rights that came along with it. So it had 254 CBT units. Those are essentially shares in that Colorado Big Thompson project. We purchased the property with the 136 acres in Weld County. We purchased that for $3.725 million. One thing that's important to point out is that those water rights, in particular those CBT units, are now valued at somewhere around like $15 million, given what those units are selling for. So a lot of positive value for the city, both in terms of the financial value and the amount of water that we get from those CBT units. It was also part of our long-term water supply plan. So similar to Height Pit that I mentioned earlier, it was seen as a place, it's not too far from Boulder Creek. And so it was seen as a place where you could do gravel pits and again, develop gravel pit storage ponds. The idea was that Broomfield would store both CBT water and Windy Gap water in those gravel pit ponds. This would require a fairly lengthy pipeline from that location up north near Erie, all the way down to our treatment plant. You can imagine maybe in that time before a lot of the development that has occurred, that pipeline seemed cost effective. Since that time, we've determined that Broomfield Reservoir, which you'll hear more about in the future, is a less costly option to meet some of our water needs. So the Becky property is no longer part of our water supply plan. The city of Erie had reached out some years ago, expressing interest in the property, expressing interest in getting a first right of refusal on the property. We did not engage them on that first right of refusal at the time, but just this year we reached out to them saying we were considering selling it, and they are interested in purchasing it. And their plan is for similar uses. They may do a couple of different things, but it's going to be related to their water system. It may be surface storage and maybe some groundwater injection type stuff. But it's pretty much to support their water system. We had the property appraised earlier this year, and the value for just the land, we would keep the CBT units, is $1.8 to $3.7 million. That range depends on mining assessments and permitting and some contingencies around those issues. So given that the property is actually no longer part of our plan, our water supply plan, and it's actually a fairly high commitment in terms of maintaining the property. There was a small grass fire there a couple of years ago, so we're stepping up our efforts to keep that property mowed and well maintained so that we don't have that fire risk. So it's mostly a cost for staff to maintain it. We do recommend continued discussion with the city of Erie about potentially selling that property and are looking for council direction on that idea. Okay, next slide. Okay, to close, as I just went over, we're hoping to get direction from council on proceeding with our conversations with the town of Erie regarding the Becky property. We do feel that Broomfield's investments over the last 20 or 30 years puts us in a good position to minimize the effects of droughts on the city. I think we'd probably be the envy of many other cities in the region in terms of our strong position with regards to drought. That does not mean we don't face some risks because of climate change in the Colorado River. And fully understanding those really requires us to gather additional information, do some more modeling, and really kind of dive into those details to better understand them and plan for them. And as we mentioned a few times, future council agenda items will include an update in April on our long-term drought and climate change preparedness planning. And then if not, certainly recommendations for Great Western Reservoir by the end of the year. We do plan to give you an update on where things are with our planning and analysis around Great Western Reservoir and the issues we have there this summer in July. I think that's it. Next slide. Happy to answer questions.
Well, thank you very much. So you do want to get some direction on the Becky property if council supports the staff's, is that the staff recommendation?
The recommendation, the recommendation would be to continue our conversations with Erie about potentially selling that to them, and wanted to get direction from council on whether you support that recommendation.
All right, thank you very much. Well, we will go to our panel. Who would like to go first? Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to go back to the thing that might be of most interest to residents in terms of drought. Can you go through what the stages in real terms would mean for residents? And if we have to ratchet up, what kind of restrictions would people face?
Yep. Thank you, Councilmember Cohen, for that. So we have essentially four. There's the drought watch, which I mentioned or I described as kind of more of a communications awareness raising level. So that is just voluntary reductions, no additional restrictions on water use under the drought watch. We would step up our communications around conservation and around drought risks. And we would almost certainly step up our enforcement of the sort of normal times, 3 times a week watering rules. You're going to hear a little bit more about that in a week, actually. But there would be no additional restrictions or mandatory cuts in water use. For drought stage 1, the primary thing that residents are going to feel and notice is we go from what we require in normal times of no more than 3 days per week of watering turf. We would go down to 2 days per week of watering turf. That would be, and I forget the exact days, but similar to the normal times, it assigns certain odd addresses to 2 days of the week and even addresses to 2 other days of the week to spread out the use and the load on the plant. That would be the main thing that residents would feel. Under drought stage 1, we do have an exception for when residents want to install new turf or seed. They can water more frequently than the baseline rules require for up to, I think it's 21 days, so that they can establish that turf, and then they have to get onto the normal 2-day-a-week plan. And then I don't remember the exact dates, but we do say no new turf or seed between, I think it's like June 20th and September 15th or something like that. Basically, we don't want you to be establishing new seed or sod during the heat of the summer during drought stage 1. Those are the main restrictions for stage 1. For stage 2, and I guess the other thing I'll say is under stage 1, there's similar reductions for large properties, including our parks. That is less about how many days per week and hours of the day, and more about trusting large property owners, including our parks, to be able to reduce their irrigation by a quantitative amount. So I think we say it goes from 1.5 inches a week to 1 inch a week, if I remember correctly, but there is a ratcheting down on large properties there. Under drought stage 2, it goes from 2 days a week to 1 day a week for turf irrigation. So all residents and businesses would have to cut back to 1 day a week. I think at 2 days a week, we would probably not see a whole lot of damage to lawns. At 1 day a week, it will start to strain lawns, especially during the height of the heat of summer. And then there's a similar ratcheting down for large properties. The exception for new turf, I believe we remove that from drought stage 2. So once we get to drought stage 2, no more new turf or new seed. Just because it is such a high water use, we want to eliminate that during drought stage 2. There's a few other restrictions I'm not remembering off the top of my head, but that's the main one, is ratcheting down from 2 days to 1 day. And then under drought stage 3, we would largely prohibit turf irrigation of any kind. Initially, there would be exceptions for critical parks. For golf courses, we say that there would be exceptions for tees and greens. But the code and our plan does say if there's an emergency, the city manager would have the authority to ratchet that down even further. I will say that drought stage 3, so you'll hear a little bit more about this in April, but when we look at the 2002 drought, which for folks who were here or if you've read about it, it was bad. People were very afraid that we were going to run out of water. There were very, very large fires. I think we would only go, if that event occurred again today, I think we would only go to drought stage 1. I think that's as far as we would need to go. You know, I can't promise that, obviously. You never know how things evolve, but when we look at the numbers, that's what would be required. Drought stage 3, we really consider to be an emergency. Like we're extremely concerned about availability of water within the next several months, kind of a thing. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, how do you balance, wildfire threat and water reduction? Because obviously people stop watering. If large properties stop watering, it raises the risk.
Yeah, so a couple of things that we try to do on city-owned properties, even outside of those watering restrictions, is when we think there is a heightened risk of wildfire, like as occurred here over the last few weeks, we try to make sure we have sufficient mowing to create buffers between the core parts of some of these properties and adjacent private property. So for example, at Great Western Reservoir, which is a big open space near Skystone, we had a mowing done at the end of the growing season in October. That was, I forget the exact width, but it was about 20 feet wide, I think, between the main part of that open space and the borders with the Skystone development. So we would try to do similar things at all of the city-owned parcels. We don't, it's a good point. We don't have a plan in place to coordinate with private landowners on that stuff. I think what we would do is do some communication around that and assistance, if we could, to try to help private parcel owners, especially people who own large parcels, to mow some of those areas, especially to mow borders and give them advice about where you would want to mow buffers between the core of those areas and adjacent properties.
Do you have a sense of how much water reduction we would need in a drought? In that, I believe it was reported in the last report, we're seeing declines in usage just through conservation in the past year. And I imagine the price increases will encourage even more conservation. So do we have a sense of, if a drought comes, if we don't get the water we need in May and June, is there a substantial reduction needed considering our water usage is going down already?
Yeah, that's correct. So we saw something like a 12% reduction in water use in 2025 compared to 2024. 2024 was a high water use year. It was pretty dry and hot, as was 2025. So it was surprising to see that decline. The decline in 2025 was more like 4% when you can compare it to the previous 5-year average. So it's noticeable, but not a huge decrease. An event, it depends on the scale of the drought, right? It depends on how severe it is and how big the water availability shortages are. If it's an event like 2002, which is a sort of baseline test case kind of that we go to a lot, the shortage, you would see this in some charts that we could show you the next time. The shortage would be small. It would be a few percent. So we would be looking to cut water use by 5 or 10, maybe 12%, something like that in summer, to make sure that
Beyond what we had this last summer.
I think so. Yeah. I can't say that I've crunched that number exactly, but it would be something like that.
So homeowners might be asked to reduce their water usage by 5 to 10% if they can figure that out.
We wouldn't use that number. We would just go to the restrictions that are in code for drought stage 1 to go from 3 days a week to 2 days a week.
Why not? I mean, if you go from 3 to 2, you have 2 long sessions of watering.
Some people are going to do that. The interesting thing is that the cuts in water use this summer kind of surprised us. We weren't expecting that. It could be some combination of the rates. I suspect, I don't have any data to back this up. I suspect it's more the water use rules. We got a lot of calls. We got a lot of emails. We got a lot of inquiries about, please help us understand the rules. Exactly what are there? Exactly what are our days? Can I do this? Can I do that? What if I do that? I think a lot of Broomfield residents really want to contribute and conserve water. So I think you're right. Some people, to try to preserve their lawn, would just do longer sessions on their 2 days a week. I think a lot of people wouldn't, and we would see I expect that we would see overall reductions in water use.
And real quick, does the rules include things like forbidding charity car washes, ones where they are not recycling water like the car washes do?
So drought stage 1 includes, I think, allowing, I think it says residents, I'd have to go back and look at the word, to wash cars in their driveways up to once a week, I think is what it says. We did not say anything about commercial car washes. And I'll be honest, we did not think about sort of like charity car washes. So that may be something that we need to go back or maybe consider whether that would fit under commercial car washes.
I mean, I
There is-
believe most commercial car washes recycle.
I think that's right. Do you know if most of them? Yeah.
True. So then it's the people in the driveways where it's just going away.
Yep.
Okay. Ron, real quick question on the Becky property. Did I understand you to say that you're looking at selling the property but not the CBT rights?
That's correct.
So what would Erie be using this property for?
They would be using it for similar kinds of activities that we plan. So either surface water storage, their existing and I think another future water plant are very close to this. It's close to Boulder Creek. And so they would either be looking at it for gravel pits and surface water storage or they're going to be using an advanced treatment process at their new plant and they need to dispose of the brine and they would look at potentially injecting that brine into the ground on this site.
Our CBT rights are not connected to that property?
They are not.
Okay, so, all right.
CBT rights are fully separate. They're not connected to the land at all, unlike
right.
some other water rights.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
I need to come back and ask you about the brine, but I'm going to go to Councilmember Anderson first.
Okay, the Becky property, was there anything in the outcome of Chimney Hollow? We're assuming that the uranium will be taken care of, that with their line or whatever they're proposing that will be fine there, but is there any scenario that we would reconsider the use of the Becky property based on the outcome of Chimney Hollow, or that like directly go to just increasing the timeframe of the Broomfield Reservoir or something? Is there any reason why we can even think of why we would want to keep the Becky property?
Thank you, Councilmember Anderson, for that question. I had to think about that for a second. No, and the reason is, so Chimney Hollow would store Windy Gap water. And under the contract that we have with Northern Water and in agreements with the West Slope entities, we're limited in how much and how long we can store Windy Gap water in reservoirs that are not part of the Windy Gap system. So I don't expect that the reservoirs at this site would be big enough to really help with that problem anyway, but if they were, we would be prohibited from storing the water long enough to be of any use. So I can't think of a water storage or other use that we would have for the property that would help with any of these other issues we're facing.
Okay, okay, so that's helpful. And yeah, based on that, then I have no concerns with continuing the conversations with the town of Erie. On the drought watch, I'm assuming we're not the only ones that are thinking about this right now. Are we paying attention to what some of the neighboring jurisdictions are doing? Is this kind of going to be are we assuming this is going to be the same thing across the region, that everyone's going to be doing similar drought watches?
I think that's pretty likely given the conditions in the snowpack in the mountains right now. We do participate in a Colorado, I keep forgetting the name of this, but it's a statewide Colorado drought coordination group. So lots of cities, East Slope and West Slope. It's mostly East Slope. It tends to be spearheaded by Northern Water and Aurora. But lots of cities participate, and we have one of those calls scheduled next month. We haven't had one in a few months. They tend to go dormant in the winter when folks aren't thinking about this too much. And I expect on that call, we'll be hearing about a lot of cities who are starting to think about the snowpack and when they might do a drought declaration and what their procedures are, and we share ideas. I have talked to a few counterparts through the Northern Water meetings, and I know that other cities, especially Windy Gap participants, are concerned about the snowpack conditions and certainly have this on their radar screen and considering some sort of drought response in the coming months.
Councilmember Anderson, just to add, there were several is probably an overstatement, but large communities that enacted water restrictions over the last 2 years. So again, to think that water restrictions were already on their plate and now we're 42% of where we should be overall. I think that's going to be a very different meeting that Mark is having in the following weeks to make the determination to what degree. And I would assume that going from 3 days a week to 2 days a week will be providing a higher level of latitude than a lot of our surrounding communities.
Okay, I was just thinking from the standpoint of, this isn't gonna be something that we're trying to get the word out on. This is going to be making the news across, there's gonna be a lot of awareness. Okay, that's helpful. And then on the enforcement, is this outside of just the news across the counties here, and also us putting out the notices that we're in the drought watch, will it be visible? Like, will you start to see the reservoirs dropping, or will it be filling them up, or will you start to noticeably see this where people can visibly see that this is a drastic concern, especially as you get to that level 3?
So the main, if I understand your question is, will we start to see reservoirs drop because of the conditions and the lack of snowpack and so forth? Interestingly, likely what we will see, which is going to be counterintuitive and it makes this drought communication challenge very challenging, is we'll see the reservoirs start to fill in the spring because there is some snow. So what snow there is will melt, reservoirs will start to fill. They probably will not fill to capacity. Certainly all of them won't fill to capacity. I can promise you Lake Mead and Lake Powell will barely move at all. Those large reservoirs on the Colorado River. Some of our regional reservoirs will fill. If they're half full now, they might reach 75%, something like that. The thing is that even though they will rise and they'll come up, regional drought supply and regional drought supply plans count on them getting more or less full every year. So if they only get to 75 or 80% or whatever the case may be, that would be considered a shortage. So it's a trick to figure out exactly how we would communicate what the conditions, how the conditions translate into a shortage. I think the snowpack is the thing that we would it's been in the news. People can kind of intuitively know it. You can look at the mountains and see there's not as much snow up there. If you're a skier or a snowboarder, you're very, very annoyed right now. So I think that's probably the most compelling thing that we would use in communications, but we've actually been talking with the communications team here at Broomfield to think about different ways that we would do that and coordinating with that regional group. I also wanted to come back to, Ken just showed me that as of January, so as of this month, Denver Water went on to a water shortage watch. So their term is water shortage. It's more or less interchangeable with our term drought watch. So they have initiated their sort of communication and awareness level for a potential shortage this year.
Okay, so we'll have some help in communicating the situation. All right, and that's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Lim.
On the possible usage for the Becky property, you mentioned brine injection wells. I'm not an expert on this, but I have some familiarity with the fact that oil and gas production injects their brine, their waste products into the ground. So is that what we're talking about that Erie might use this for?
It's possible. They're looking at surface water storage or groundwater wells for injecting the brine from their water treatment. So this is not an oil and
water
gas
treatment.
Yeah, this is not an oil
They're
and
not
gas.
going to sell it to an oil and gas company to inject their.
As far as I know, no. I mean, it's certainly something we could consider in the discussions with them, that's a use we would not want to see on that property. It is next to Erie. I'm sorry?
I mean, it's not on our land.
We own the land.
We own the land.
Doctor, do you know much about brine injection?
Yeah, we currently own the land.
Right. Has to be a condition.
All right. Yep. So brine injection is a technique used at the various different types of water treatment or wastewater treatment facilities. Basically, it's depending on the type of treatment system you use, the waste product has a high sodium content and can't be discharged to a local water body such as Boulder Creek or Big Dry Creek or those type of things. And so they do deep well subsurface injection of the brine material. Unfortunately, we don't live close to an ocean, so everybody within the intercontinental United States has to use some kind of a injection well to get rid of that brine solution. We evaluated that for one of our treatment systems at the wastewater treatment facility, but chose to go with a different technology, mostly because you don't recapture that water. So roughly about 10% would be probably their reject water, and that would be the brine solution.
I mean, in these negotiations, is it possible that we would say that any further usage doesn't involve waste from oil and gas production? I mean, I don't know how to phrase that technically in a in a contract.
Sure, that could be some of our discussions with Erie. My understanding from Erie is that they're building their new treatment facility almost across the street from this location. And they were planning on using it as, just like we use Glasser, to use it as their terminal reservoir to provide the water into the treatment facility. I think that was the last understanding I have when I've talked to their water utilities director, is that's the purpose of what they are looking for.
Okay,
We'll clarify that.
okay.
Even to the extent of indicating, in addition to saying, I'm looking over at my partner, but
Yeah.
precluding the sale if there is, or we just say you are precluded from storing. Yeah. Suffices to say, well, we would have two components. One, we'll ask the question of what their intentions are, clarifying the Bren, and then having that part of the purchase is however Nancy and her crew can have that. Yeah, just thinking through that. I mean, it's our land. We're going to sell it to you as long as you don't do X.
I would add
Other
that,
issues where we'd want to make sure it runs with the land, so so it would apply to future owners. So we'd have to work that out and get Erie's agreement, of course, on any term, which sounds like they might be on board.
it is also the location where the Erie tree is located at. And they are protecting that. And so we will clarify and get back to council with their desires.
Okay, great. The the slide on the Becky property refers to the fact that the Broomfield Reservoir would be more apt to be used for storage. I don't know how exactly that's worded. And then there's another section in the memo where it refers to contingencies. If the Great Western Reservoir gets, what's the term? Closed, I want to say, I don't think that was the term, decommissioned, thank you. And now I see what I wrote. Decommissioned. So, and that has okay, we could maybe use other, like we could use potable water and store it in the Broomfield Reservoir. So I'm aware, because it's in the neighborhood, and following closely, that there's plans started for the Broomfield Reservoir. So how are the stage that we're in for plans for the Broomfield Reservoir, will that be impacted by future decisions, and then the plans may have to be revised later to enlarge the Broomfield Reservoir?
The Broomfield Reservoir goes back in history of Broomfield. It was originally designed and actually permitted through the state for construction in around 2008, I believe it was. We had the permits, we had the contractor, the design was completed, and it was ready for construction. We also just went into a recession, and at that time, the decision was not to move forward at that time with the reservoir. We'd have to go back in historical documents and figure out exactly why that decision was made, but basically it was shelved at that point in time. Since then, we've been evaluating and at that time it was a 5,000 acre foot reservoir, I believe is what it was staged for. Since then, we've been evaluating what is our long-term storage needs and the purpose of it. And so we're in the process of evaluating what size of reservoir will it need to be? And that's part of what our master planning is about, is what size will that be? And through our 2050 planning. And we'll be able to identify that, and then that'd be the size that we will continue to work with the engineering firm. Fortunately for us, the engineers who designed the original is still working for the company that designed it. And we have been in contact with them and have talked with them about a couple of different scenarios of what size the reservoir would be, and are beginning to get some cost estimates for that. And that's part of our 5-year CIP budget, which has been included.
Okay, thank you. Do you have an estimate from Chimney Hollow, Northern Water, I guess it would be, regarding the delay in the usage of the water from Chimney Hollow?
So it's not a simple question to answer, unfortunately. There's a lot of planning going on about which of the solutions would be most amenable to each of the participants, and then all 12 participants are going to have to come to some form of agreement on that. There has been discussion about some initial fill into the reservoir this year, this calendar year, if we can reach an agreement this year about what solution we want to implement. I will caveat all that with Winnie Gap is somewhat susceptible to droughts. And so if there is a severe drought this year, or even a moderate drought this year, those water rights likely wouldn't come into priority, and there wouldn't be much water to put in the reservoir anyway. So it depends on, it needs sort of average or wetter years for any water to be available to put in there. That said, they'll still be able to fill it at least somewhat if we do reach an agreement this year. The timing for fill and use of the reservoir is probably delayed compared to no uranium by 2 to 3 years, which isn't, we've been looking at and we'll look at it more closely, but we don't currently feel like that's a critical issue for us. I mean, it'd be nicer to have it sooner just to add to flexibility, but it's not a critical failing for us.
Okay, and there was something, and maybe I just didn't hear clearly, in the way that you worded the statement about mitigation, that seemed in my mind to throw a weight of implementation on Broomfield as opposed to Northern Water solving the mitigation problem. Did I misinterpret? Because that was like, whoa, that isn't what I expected. I expected the weight of implementation to mitigate it to be on Northern Water, not Broomfield. Did I misunderstand what you said?
Unfortunately, Councilmember Lim, I don't think you misunderstood. So the participants own the project and pay for the project. So if there are costs, whether they be financial costs or coordination or delays in water availability, those would affect the participants, including Broomfield.
And then are all the participants going to have to come to an agreement on what kind of mitigation will occur? I mean, I had a completely different idea now that we may decide how things need to be mitigated differently than another partner in this project.
So that is a possibility. So I think it's both and. So the participants do need to reach an agreement on what kind of mitigation, and I'm using that term very broadly. So there are mitigation alternatives that would not involve any new costs. They would just slowly fill and drain the reservoir and mix it with other sources in a way that would keep water quality very high and delivered water to all the participants, and it would not require any investment in treatment facilities for the reservoir itself. Every entity, every partner in the project would then have to decide if they're going to implement anything further at their own treatment plants if they decide to, if they wish to. Our current plan with the alternatives on the table, including some that don't involve any new costs and including some that do, central costs at the Northern project itself, is that we would not need additional treatment here. The water quality would be very close to what it is now, and that we would not need to implement any huge new investments at our water treatment facility to deal with that in the future.
Okay.
Just to help people put this into some kind of common reference point for the non-chemist or non-engineer, is that 1 part per billion is 1 square foot in 36 square miles. So about the size of Broomfield, where you stand is almost 1 square foot. And figure the whole size of Broomfield, that's 1 part per billion. So when we're talking about these concentrations, obviously there's risk and there's tolerance and there's perception and there's all those realities. But just as a visualization, that's what we're talking about. So some of those treatment options do get expensive because we're talking about removing a very small amount in a very large reservoir.
Thank you. I have some questions about Great Western Reservoir too, but we're going to have a more in-depth discussion of that another time. I'll save those. Thank you.
Next, Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much for the presentation. I have about 9 questions that I came up with while I read the memo. So bear with me. And most of this does not go towards the question that you guys asked, which I'll get to at the end. But in the memo, there was a point made about estimates related to how much Denver Water would curtail us in the event of a drought. And my question is, have we had further conversations with Denver Water about what future curtailments would be under the state of Colorado's hot and dry drought scenario that was mentioned in the memo? I know we were kind of assuming or guessing about 50%, but I was wondering if we'd had those conversations.
We have had some conversations with Denver Water and their planning staff, particularly when we did the drought response plan and some drought vulnerability analyses at the same time. As you might imagine, it's very difficult for them to speculate on sort of general but unknown specifics. And so they weren't able to tell us what curtailment would look like under those hypothetical scenarios. The reason is that hot and dry scenario, while it does provide useful information from the state water plan, it doesn't give us really any specifics about how that's going to affect reservoir storage or water supply availability for any particular system. So Denver Water is probably a little further along in understanding that because they're a much bigger organization with a lot more resources at their disposal. But no, they haven't been able to give us an idea of what that curtailment would look like. I will say that the 30% curtailment is written into the contract, but then it does say it can go higher from there if their board deems it necessary.
Okay. And then somewhat related to that, there was a mention that there's a lack of modeling related for Windy Gap / Chimney Hollow under the climate change scenarios, specifically the hot and dry scenario. And is that for roughly the same reasons that Denver Water does not have kind of an estimate? Or is it because, or also partially because Chimney Hollow is not operational yet, so we don't have any kind of underlying data to pull from?
I think it's a bit of combination of those two things. So it's the models to simulate these things are pretty complicated. And so when you change all of the inputs driving them, like if you take a sort of normal historic scenario and you throw a climate change scenario, it's usually going to break the model. So they have to go back and sort of redesign the model to kind of accommodate those different inputs. And they haven't, Northern Water, we've had some conversations with them. It's something that I'm hoping they're going to be able to do in the next few years. But it's something that their staff is otherwise focused on some of these other issues that we're working on. So that hasn't been done yet.
Okay. And then continuing on with kind of climate change and climate science, still evolving and refining the models that scientists are using to make predictions for the future. Is there a chance, and is staff maybe kind of entertaining the idea that there's going to be a new baseline of allocations coming from CBT, Denver Water, and Chimney Hollow, Windy Gap? And if so, does that kind of necessitate the construction and operation of Broomfield Reservoir sooner than 2037?
Ooh, Councilmember Ward, that's a really complicated question. So we have looked at change in CBT supply or yield under climate change scenarios. I think that's mentioned in memo that we did work with a consultant a few years ago, and they work with Northern's model, so they were able to tell us what the change in supply would look like, and that's reflected in some of our scenarios, and we'll bring some of that detail back to you in the update in April. I don't think, if I understand the way you use that term, I don't think there'll be a new baseline in the sense of the amount of water we would get from it on average, like in normal years. I don't think that will change. It could go down by a small amount. It would probably not be a meaningful amount for our long-term planning, but it's not going to go down by 20% or something like that. A little harder to say for Windy Gap, just again, because that modeling and that analysis hasn't been done. That is a more junior right, so it is potential that there could be more impact there. Denver Water, I guess my response to that would be is that we need to continue to have more conversations with them. They're, engineers and scientists are naturally risk averse and sort of don't want to be pinned down, right? Like we don't know what that data is going to look like. So it's a little hard to have those conversations with them, but they understand the predicament that we're in, that if they can't give us some information, we can't plan. And so we've been having a back and forth, and we need to continue to have some of those conversations. In terms of Broomfield Reservoir, so Broomfield Reservoir is mostly about meeting summer peak demand. It's basically because the pipes that bring water to Broomfield, the capacity of those pipes can't keep up with summer demand. It already happens now, and that's why we have Glasser. That's why we built the pump station at Sienna, and that's what Broomfield Reservoir is for. So it wouldn't really help with our long-term sort of like annual or multi-year supply. So it might change a little bit because peak demands in the summer might change. It's possible that it would change the timing of the need for that, but it wouldn't be, I don't think it would be a huge impact.
Okay, wonderful. And then kind of going a little bit bigger on that topic, with the Colorado River Compact negotiations continuing, is staff either kind of planning scenarios or concern that there might just be, if some miracle happens, that the upper and lower basin states take just across the board reductions in the allotments allotted for each basin, and how that would impact our water allocations going forward?
The operative word, of course, Mr. Laurie, is what we talked about today, is miracle.
It's a miracle.
So forecasting and planning based on a miracle is not something that staff spends a lot of time doing performance on. Mark, talk just a little bit, share a part of that, not the whole conversation, of course, because we don't have all NAIC, but part of that conversation that we talked about today and with the exec team about where you believe that is headed from the upper basin and lower basin, metro communities versus suburbs, and what we're likely to see first, those conversations within the next 5 months, Councilmember Ward, that have nothing to do with a miracle or the word reduction. More like scrapping it out at the table.
Yeah. I think to City Manager Hoffman's point, it's very hard to speculate on what this would look like. The memo sort of talked a little bit about, uncertainty at the global level of what climate change looks like. And I realize you asked about the Colorado River, but I'll get to the point of this in a second. Uncertainty at the global level, uncertainty about how the global level affects local river basins, uncertainty about how changes in local river basins affect a particular water system, uncertainty about then how water rights would be allocated. It's kind of the same thing for the Colorado River. So we don't really know what a negotiated solution would look like. If there is no negotiated solution, we don't really know how courts would interpret the compact. And then perhaps just as critically, we don't know how the state engineer's office within the state of Colorado would implement it. Who would be curtailed first? They have hinted at the fact that they would not do it by strict priority. They would not just do it strictly by the youngest water rights get cut first, and then the next oldest water rights, and then the next ones and the next ones. They said they probably don't want to do it that way. They want to have some other considered trade-off analysis, but they have not issued a policy on what that would look like. So it is virtually impossible to figure out what those shortages would look like. There have been some studies, and for all of the people who say, hey, that's a really good study that really analyzes it, there are a whole bunch of experts who say those people have no idea what they're doing, and they really didn't do a very good job analyzing this. So it's pretty hard to get a beat on it at this point. The final thing I'll say is that I'm obviously biased because I'm a Coloradan and I work for a municipality in Colorado whose future depends very much on this. I do feel like the state of Colorado and the upper basin's negotiating position is very strong and very reasonable. It's a whole other conversation as to why. But I do think that they have a pretty strong position in this, and that I would be surprised if there were large curtailments for the upper basin.
Okay, wonderful. I'm gonna kind of shift gears into some other parts of the memo. There was a mention that staff is looking at the potential of adding solar at least certain sites, either over or in close proximity to like Sienna Reservoir, for example, to address the issue of evaporation. So my question was, do we have kind of either an estimate or like we know the number of this is how much water we're losing annually be due to evaporation, and it's expected to kind of increase as the overall climate increases in temperature?
I don't have those numbers at my fingertips, but it's especially because, so evaporation is basically proportional to the amount of surface area that's exposed to the air. Those are small reservoirs, especially relative to their storage. So it's, let's say, in the tens of acre feet. I know acre feet is a goofy, stupid number that we water people use. That's a few tenths of a % of our water supply that we're
Okay.
losing. So it would be a benefit. Don't get me wrong. You always want to conserve as much water as possible. The primary benefit wouldn't necessarily be that, but would be more on the solar renewable energy side of things.
Okay. And is staff looking at every potential site? Like we have Sienna Reservoir, Great Western Reservoir, and some other locations, or are we only focusing on a couple of locations for strategic reasons?
So far, we've been talking about Sienna Reservoir. We wouldn't want to do because of it's a recreational asset, and solar panels on the reservoir itself, I think, would interfere with that. So we haven't considered that. It's not like it would be impossible, but we haven't considered that. We've talked about Glasser Reservoir, the small reservoir right behind the water treatment plant. We need to look into risks that might pose. I don't think there are any. I think this has been done on drinking water reservoirs and other locations, but we just need to due diligence. We need to look into that a little bit more. We would like to do it at Great Western Reservoir. It's a much bigger body of water with a big surface area. The winds up there are ferocious. We have solar powered aerators essentially on the surface, and those things get damaged and moved around despite our best efforts to anchor them by the wind. So I don't know if that would be a great location for solar panels, but it's an idea and I will say that this is quite preliminary. It's just a concept at this point that we're considering. So I wouldn't even say we have, conceptual plans. It's sort of ideas that we're considering.
Okay. And then it was noted that we've seen a reduction in residential water use over this past couple of years, probably partially because of increased water rates, but also because people are just wanting to comply with our new watering laws. Do we have a number of whether we've seen a reduction in commercial users from their water usage perspective?
I don't have that number. It's a number we can easily generate, so we can follow up with that, but I don't have that number.
Okay, but we have seen a reduction from them as well, not just from the residential side.
I'm pretty sure it's across the board, but I don't know for sure.
Okay.
We'd have to look at the data, but it wouldn't be a hard thing to do, so we can.
Okay, and then does staff have any tools or methods in which to give commercial tenants ways to further reduce their consumption of water? Obviously, like restaurants are going to be a big user of water in the commercial space compared to maybe more of our vacant office buildings. But I'm just curious if we have kind of that same toolbox that we do for our residential users.
We do have some. So most of the rebates and incentives that we do now are related to outdoor water use, because it's where a large share of our water use is, and it's where most of the flexibility in water use exists. So by and large, rules nationally and statewide about toilets and sinks and showers and other dishwashers and whatnot were passed years and years and years ago. And I think the saturation of those things into our housing stock and into our businesses is pretty high. So I think there's a lot less sort of capacity to reduce on indoor uses. It's not that it's not there. And a lot of businesses, it's probably case by case basis, in particular to the kind of operation they have. Restaurants might be the easiest one, but again, I think a lot of those dishwashers and whatnot they use are already pretty efficient. So most of them are related to outdoor water use, and there are rebates that we have for turf replacement, for upgrading irrigation systems that are available to commercial entities.
Okay. With my 22 seconds left, I'll ask my one question and then give my response. So my final question is, in the memo, there was a note related to the Baseline Land and Reservoir Company and Lower Boulder Ditch properties with their associated shares, and that we don't necessarily need those anymore. Is there a reason staff is comfortable with that position?
Yeah, so both of those systems, first of all, they're tiny amounts of shares. I can't remember the numbers. I think they were both fractions of a share. I think
1 and 0.06667.
Thank you. So very, very little, very small shares. Both of those systems, they would be virtually impossible to get to our water treatment plant. So that's one reason. We could use them for there's all these other things we have to do with water rights, augmenting and replacing return flows and stuff. Some of them either of those could be useful for that. We would have to go to court to change them and to go through that headache and that cost to change those in court for 1 share. And I think you said it was 0.6 shares. It wouldn't be worth it. So we would likely sell those with the property. Erie might have other ways to use them for some of those similar kinds of things.
All right, perfect. For my direction, yes, I am comfortable with us continuing to see if Erie is willing to purchase the Becky property, along with some of the kind of restrictions that Councilmember or Mayor Pro Tem Lim mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Rutt and Mr. Laurie, for the presentation tonight. Lots of great information here. So hopefully our residents are tuning in and hearing all this great stuff too. Follow-up question on the Becky property. I'm not really hearing a lot of trade-offs for how we might use that land going forward in the future. If the current reservoirs that we've got our eyes on, fall through or something like that. I guess I'm curious if Flo has discussed this or if they had any ideas about the Becky property's usage, if you know about that.
We've talked briefly, provided an overview of the Becky property. We haven't gotten into real in-depth discussions with them. There are some inquiries from Boulder County to try to keep that open space. Also from the town of Erie, they've also mentioned whether it's a water treatment reservoir situation. Either way, the residents around there have expressed interest in keeping that kind of an open area, whether that's water reservoirs or dedicated open space. So that's really what the central pieces around that is, the usage that we've been told so far. Is that those type of uses?
Okay.
That helps?
Yep, definitely. Thank you. So with that in mind, I'm also supportive of pursuing the Becky property conversations further with Mayor Pro Tem's carve out, if we can, our conversations. So continuing on with that thread, Councilmember Anderson had a great question about our comparison with our neighboring communities, and your comment was that we are well positioned, in this area. I'm curious how our One Water plan compares to what they're pursuing right now. Are we more aggressive, less aggressive, kind of in the middle of the pack?
Great question, Councilmember Ron. Right now, Denver Water has completed their One Water plan. The city of Fort Collins is nearing their completion. They've been working on it for several years now. I think the city of Aurora is getting close to finishing theirs if it's not finished. And so those are the only ones I know of that are further along than we are. Colorado Springs, obviously, is another one. And so we would be, as far as I know, one of the newer adopters of the One Water plan.
Okay. Thank you for that information. Yeah, I think some of the comments tonight make me think about future competition. And, if we have more water than everybody else, like, how does that play out? I mean, I don't know if you can speculate on that.
Water utilities do various things. If we have say we're not going to use all of our water, or in other cases, they may lease water out to other municipalities to use if they are falling short for some reason. We lease water to Augment sometimes, depending on where that is at. Agriculture, particularly in northern Colorado, through their system, since the majority of that is ag, there's a lot of ag leases. We do lease some of our water from time to time to ag purposes. And so there are some of those exchanges that happen pretty routinely each and every year.
Councilmember Brown, if I may add, it was as if Councilmember Ward and Councilmember Brown were at the table today as we're having our 2-hour water conversation. Part of that discussion, we will find that those communities that have a diversification of water sources will be able to, like anything else, it's just like having a diversified revenue stream. It makes a substantial difference on the amount of risk that you can assume, the speed with which you need to make decisions, and the complexities of how to weigh each one of those various sources and elements. We're finding with water that level of risk continues to decrease, and not gradually, but very, very quickly. Part of our conversation today was the price per acre foot that Mr. Laurie has continually referred to through tonight exponentially increases. We do not see an end in sight. In fact, we see it, I don't want to say skyrocketing, but certainly when we talk about liquid gold, this is it. This is what will either sustain or break or divide or deteriorate communities quicker than anything else. Part of the conversation that we move through for the rest of the year will also include to what degree is development impacted by water. We know that Lafayette has now indicated, the mayor and I have had this conversation, if you have a new development in Lafayette, those developers have to bring water. And not any kind of water, CBT water, which we all know through some of the conversations regarding Eagle Trace, that CBT is top of the line. It's much more flexible with how you utilize it, and therefore communities that are indicating to these developers, it's tap fees aren't covering. We all know now that development doesn't pay its own way. It's never paid its own way. It's never going to pay its own way. And tap fees in and of themselves are not sustainable either. So having conversations with council, we will, again, that's why we're segregating these into buckets, into chunks, quarter discussions. But by the end of this year, and Flo will be our first, as I look out at Board Member Taylor, some of these conversations about to what degree does this conversation influence some of your other discussions and decisions that you'll have for the rest of this year. And it all comes back to the viability of having a finite source of water that continues to be volatile, continues to be expensive, and those unintended consequences of continuing to make decisions without including that element. Mark, maybe next time we should just have our meeting at a study session.
Yeah, thank you for speaking to that, City Manager Hoffman. That definitely, that diversification of portfolio was kind of the way I was thinking of it. So yeah, that definitely helps. In relation to that, I was thinking about the Colorado Water Plan Grant. So the memo indicated that that was key to us updating our 2027 water efficiency plan. So can you speak to what the likelihood that we are going to receive the grant is, and then the impact to our staff and our budget if we don't get the grant?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So we did apply on I think it was the December 1st deadline for Colorado Water Plan grants. The staff at the CWCB, they're great. They are very, very, very available for interested grantees to talk with them. And they did indicate that in most cycles, they are able to reserve a certain portion of their state water plan funds specifically for water efficiency plan grants. So I guess the way they think of it and the feedback they've heard is that this is required under state law, these water efficiency plans. It's an unfunded mandate. So therefore, the state ought to help cities develop and update these. So I think the odds of us getting some part of the grant we requested are high. I have heard since submitting the grant application that they got more than they expected, more applications than they expected. So my thinking is we're likely to get a grant, we're likely to get less than we asked for, and we'll have to make up the difference. We do have some funds set aside in our budget to be able to do that. So the idea is that we'll use the grant or some internal funds to support a consultant to help us update the plan, and we'll go forward with that with or without the grant. But I do think we'll get a portion of what we asked for.
Okay, so you wouldn't make any changes to the level of quality that you're looking for in this plan based on that? Okay.
Not at all. No, we really want to, I feel like we're maybe a hair behind on some of the things on our water efficiency plan. And instead of just making it a box checking exercise, I'd really like to make it a useful plan that helps us chart out exactly what kinds of water conservation activities we want to do over this next 5 to 10 years.
Excellent. Yeah, I share your hope in that plan, meeting those needs. Let's see here. So as Councilmember Hoffman was alluding to, obviously Eagle Trace has been a topic in my Ward 3 this year or last year. I'm curious, thinking just kind of big picture in Broomfield, if you can speak to how the Neeson reservoirs play into that and kind of these smaller bodies that we have around. I'm just curious, like conceptually, how that fits in.
Can I take a crack at that?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I can do it in 20 words or less, but it probably won't be as informative or thrilling as yours.
I don't know about thrilling, and I don't know if I can do it in less than 2,000 words, but I'll try. So if I understand your question, how they fit into the problem at Eagle Trace and the water rights and their availability of water, or is it a larger question that you're asking?
I mean, more from a water detention, water retention perspective, as we're talking about all of the places that we have in Broomfield to store water, like obviously, I mean, is that something that the city is still interested in, kind of making sure that we have all of those bodies around? Or do you see, as we're pursuing some of these larger things like the Broomfield Reservoir, for example, that maybe your interest in some of the smaller,
Yeah.
I'm not like, I don't even know that I have the words to talk about it, but I think if that gets the gist.
Sure. As a water supply asset, I don't think that the Nissen reservoirs or any of these other small ponds are a critical piece that could help us meet our needs in the future. It's difficult to get the water from those places to the water treatment plant. The amount of pumping and conveyance and pipes we'd have to build would be cost prohibitive, and there'd be other solutions that would be much more cost effective to solve those problems. They do occasionally still from a water supply standpoint, they do occasionally help us. There's all these bizarre vagaries of water rights where we have to replace certain kinds of water and get water back into the river. And some of these little ponds sometimes can help us do some of those things, especially if they have structures in place to allow us to make manual releases back to the creek. So for example, there is a couple of ponds in the city that are decreed under one of our decrees that we can do that. We can literally pump some water out of the pond when it's too full, and we'll get credit for that on some of the water we have to return to the creek. But those are fairly limited in Broomfield. I'm not sure if other cities have more use of their ponds that way. So most of them are aesthetic resources, or as you alluded to, they're stormwater detention and retention assets. And that's the critical interest that we have in those Nissen reservoirs. They're part of the stormwater drainage from that development. And they've been part of that stormwater drainage for 30 or 40 or 50 years or something. So that's the key interest at this point in making sure those reservoirs are still part of our stormwater drainage system.
Great. Thank you for speaking to that and kind of helping me feel my way into that question. I'm sure, just folks are interested in that in general still. So I guess last question that I had is, if the Broomfield Reservoir is maybe not environmentally sound, I mean, I know that there are some concerns with the oil and gas so close by over there. Is there a fallback plan?
We have not identified an alternative site for water storage. So that is the site that we're assessing now. So we're doing a couple of things on the environmental front for that. I have been coordinating, just at the beginning stages of coordinating with our in-house staff, Ryan Resch, who handles our energy and environment program. Just started to talk with him about that oil and gas pad that's near there. And then in addition, we've started to we'll likely require a federal Clean Water Act permit because of the site. It's possible, it's actually, I would say it's probable we would get what they call a nationwide permit, which is essentially a streamlined accelerated permit just because there are no critical streams or habitats there. But we have to do the assessment to prove that there are no critical habitats there. And so we have consultants on board to look at that and implement the federal government's methodology for that. We have not identified an alternative site for storage as Ken alluded to earlier, described earlier. That's been part of our planning since 2002 or so. And so it's definitely been the target for increasing storage. We did, to postpone when we would need Broomfield Reservoir. That was the purpose for putting the new pump station at Sienna Reservoir. So Sienna is now connected into the water treatment plant, and we'll begin to operate that here over the next few months. So that pushes out the time at which we would need Broomfield Reservoir, but it almost certainly doesn't eliminate the need for Broomfield Reservoir.
Great. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next is Councilmember McKenzie.
Thanks. Five questions. The first one is the 18% reuse for the 700 million gallons. Do we have longitudinal data on that?
We do. We have data going back to when the reuse system was first instituted in 2002. Some of these dates I don't remember, or I don't know. We do have historical data. I think I looked back for that average 5 or 10 years. So it was over some period of time. I don't remember exactly, but it was over the last handful of years, 5 to 10 years. So it's pretty representative, and it doesn't change much from year to year. The amount of demand on the system only varies a little bit with rainfall. So that's a pretty representative number for what things should look like going forward.
Is there any threshold or capacity, anything preventing that from going up?
It's mostly related to, there's a few things. It's mostly related to only some of our water sources are legally reusable. So it's really Windy Gap. I mentioned earlier that we can reuse CBT if we replace some of the return flows. We don't yet do that very much. We do it a little bit because we don't have that Height Pit project fully built out. So we don't have the full capacity to do that with CBT. So it's mostly limited by our water rights portfolio and which of those are fully consumable, as water lawyers say, or reusable legally. That's the main constraint. There are some other physical pumping and other constraints that sometimes limit that, but it's mostly the water rights stuff.
So in order to increase that capacity, we'd have to change the law.
We could try to change the law, Councilmember McKenzie, or acquire more water that's fully consumable, or the pathways to doing that are mostly as we start to use the community ditch water, the Marshall shares. I said that's fully consumable or reusable, so we're going to look for ways to do that. And then if we choose, if it seems cost effective, build out Height Pit and start to reuse more of our CBT effluent. Those would probably be the big pathways to increase that.
So when we do these drought stages, how are the restrictions enforced for residents?
So we started to do this last summer for the normal times, non-drought requirements. So starting in 2025, we had 3 times a week, no more than 3 times a week, and only water between 6 p.m. and 10 a.m. during the cooler hours of the day. We did a few things that we would continue and step up in any drought declaration. So one, we established a new online form that residents could report suspected cases of violating those requirements or water or general water waste. That online form would automatically populate into a spreadsheet that our team would use, and we developed a procedure to track those. If they seemed like there were things that we should go out into the field and investigate, we would go out and take a look. We developed a standard notice of violation letter that we would send out to the address on file with that account to let them know that staff observed the following violations on such and such a date, provide my contact information if they wanted to discuss it or if they wanted to dispute the notice. If we were not able to verify a violation, we would send an informational postcard, kind of somewhat similar to the kinds of things we often send with paper bills that would just let people, the the address, the owner of that address know what the new rules are. Those are the main things. We did also, our staff, as they were out and about, either investigating some of these or for other reasons, we would ask them to keep an eye out. And if they saw irrigation going on, say between the hours of 10 a.m. and 6 p.m., to send that address a postcard. So it's mostly those things. I think if in a drought declaration, we have had initial discussions about having additional communication and enforcement out in the field. So if we don't have this all ironed out yet, but some of our other staff that are out in the field on a daily basis, we would ask them to keep their eyes out for potential violations during a drought when we would feel it'd be much more important to make sure that we're getting word out to residents and getting notices of violation out to addresses that refuse to comply.
Councilmember McKenzie, Broomfield is historically known for high compliance. We are not a community that that has a significant number of resistors. So having a plan B or a plan C, even if we anticipate pretty significant pushback on an item, we find high compliance. And again, complying is something that we go to great lengths in order to achieve. So the ongoing conversations, part of it is public shaming, right? To Councilmember Cohen's point, if you're out washing your car and there's a water restriction in place, and a lot of folks know about it, you may get the stink eye. If not something a little more, did you know that we're under water restrictions? So we'll do a thorough and complete job of communication, outreach, and engagement on all of our forums, and then look to our community to help further that compliance.
As someone who was here during 2002, and the last time we council authorized a drought declaration, I think Jeff Ruger, the other deputy director, and I were both here during that time. There are, like City Manager Hoffman said, is that we do have a informational. We would leave information with the resident, reminding them that we are under a drought condition, and to inform them of those restrictions. And obviously, there's steps through the process to escalate that if they choose not to follow those directions. But we do have a lot of those procedures in place from 2002. We're going through the process of looking at them, updating them to the current ordinances, codes, and staffing. We do have, between Public Works and Water Utilities and Parks, there are several staff members throughout the community throughout the day. And that would be one of our main sources of identification also.
I was not here in 02, but there's lots of reference to it. So what happens if not necessarily another 02 happens, but multiple 02s happen in a single year? Like, are we doing our modeling based on the IPCC scenarios and such? And then the second question is, like, how are we thinking about this from a systems perspective? In addition to mitigation, are we thinking about this from a regenerative point of view? How do we get more water, like, to begin with, versus mitigating against water as a scarcity?
Thank you, Councilmember McKenzie. Those are weighty questions as well. Kind of drawing back to some of the earlier questions and responses that I attempted to give, the climate change stuff, we're a little bit limited. We've gone a third of the way in being able to analyze some of these scenarios against our water supply. I do think, and the other thing I will say is that, yes, the scenarios like the hot, we tend to rely initially on the hot and dry scenario that comes from the state water plan. That is what they call a downscaled scenario from the global climate model scenario. So they are based on the IPCC global climate modeling, but it has to sort of be brought down a few levels to be regional and local. We are, I think, still a few layers, a few steps away from being able to say what that looks like for our water system, but we're starting to nibble around the edges on that so we can better understand those risks. And In terms of regenerative, if I understand what you're talking about there, like I'm curious if you're thinking about sort of cloud seeding or other sort of ways of regenerating. So that's not a, there are discussions of that. I know the state looks into it. There are continued interest in that kind of thing. There tends to always be more interest in where else can we go get water from, right? So can we build a, I just saw a story the other day about desalinating ocean water and delivering it to Las Vegas, I think it was. So there usually tends to be more discussions on large engineered solutions, even if those seem a little bit folly. In terms of Colorado, in terms of regenerating, there has been some discussions about cloud seeding. There are uses of groundwater. It's not renewable, by and large, it's not renewable groundwater. It's deep aquifer groundwater that has a limited lifespan and is not recharged. So that's not really a regenerative or renewable, what the concept that you're looking for there. I think the cloud seeding thing is the main concept that's out there, and I think that's still very much unproven.
For the IPCC modeling, they have different pathways, right? 1.5, 2, etc. Do we do the same?
Sort of. So, so those pathways, I think they used to be called SRS. I think they might be called something else now. The modeling that was done for the state water plan to look at how weather and hydrology would change on a regional local basis are based on those. But what ends up happening is it's kind of like I was talking about before. There's sort of uncertainty or at least a range of outcomes that might happen at the global scale based on how much greenhouse gas there might be in the environment and based on how the global climate responds to the amount of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. Then there's uncertainty about how that global warming will cause state level, region level warming. Then there's uncertainty about how that regional level warming will affect the river basin on and on. So there's like these cascading uncertainties. And there's a lot of different ways to tackle that problem to get from global climate change to how much water is going to be available in this river in 2073. So the state water plan tackles that by looking at a whole bunch of different statistics on the climate modeling and picking a few that seem to be representative of clusters or sort of types of outcomes that we might face, basically because it's like analysis paralysis. If you try to analyze every single one of them, you'll never get anywhere. They'd still be working on the state water plan today. So they pick a few that seem to be representative of sort of the tail, not quite the tail risks, but fairly extreme risks. And that hot and dry one tends to be the one that they look at.
Got it. How are we managing and supporting the high intensity non-residential or commercial water users?
How are we supporting them? Would you mind clarifying that for me just so I can hit it right?
A number of the companies that I advise could use help on the water that they use. So if we think about like not only in addition to food, all right, there's processing, there's manufacturing, data centers are a big thing now, right? How are we engaging with them?
So I would say the main way that we support commercial and HOA, it often tends to be a little bit more HOA, but it's open to commercial other commercial entities, is through their outdoor water use. That really is the sort of ball game where we focus on for conservation. So I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail, but there's a new program we're standing up now with Resource Central, an organization we partner with on a lot of this stuff that supports HOAs to plan turf replacement as well as to plan other landscape irrigation savings. So that's going to be open to 4 total HOAs in 2026, and we hope it'll be available to more. We offer free irrigation system audits that are available to any kind of entity. So an individual resident, an HOA, a business that owns a significant lawn or irrigation system can get a free irrigation system audit through Broomfield. And that audit will identify for them where their system can be optimized to reduce water use, change their schedules, adjust their sprinkler heads where they need to make repairs, as well as many of our rebates are available to them. We don't offer what I would say support or advice on indoor commercial or industrial uses. It tends to, there's 2 reasons for that. I would say one, on a lot of the sort of standard uses, as I said, we've kind of squeezed that lemon about as much as we can squeeze it. Fixtures tend to be about as efficient as they can be. Toilets are about as efficient as they can be. More one-off industrial processes, we don't have the capacity or the expertise on our team to offer advice about that. But it's something we can look into and see if there are resources in the region or that could support other kinds of commercial operations for their water use.
Okay. I don't know if it's possible, but after the chamber meeting this morning, I'm thinking like if we have a business located in Broomfield, how we can help like expand our impact beyond Broomfield. I understand it's the outside use here, but you know, any major business is here. We can help them think about this, across their value chain. But that's neither here nor there. Okay, and then the last question is, so when I think about intergenerational justice, I see that the timing like goes out to 2050, but I usually think like 100 years. So what about the council that's not here or the kids that are not here?
So one of the reasons we use 2050 is, I think there's a couple of reasons. One, in terms of projecting population and growth, I've been doing water supply planning for 20 some years in different parts of the country. And anytime we ask planners, economists, demographers to project growth beyond about 20 or 30 years, they get pretty nervous. They're pretty hard to predict what economic trends are going to be like beyond about 20, 30 years. I think historically we were somewhat anchored to that 2050 timeframe because we used to think of that as build out. That's not a term we use anymore. But I think it was a timeframe when we envisioned build out occurring in Broomfield. And so that's a number that we use for that reason. So I think it's both because that 20 to 30 year timeframe is a population economic forecast that we can get our hands around. So therefore it's a future water demand that we can sort of reasonably have some confidence in and plan for. Those are the big reasons. In terms of, in terms of the larger issues of water availability, conservation, making sure there's enough water, I agree with you that the 100-year timeframe would be preferable on many levels. It's similarly hard to project what's going to happen on water systems 100 years out between climate change, Colorado River regulations, all that kind of stuff. It's pretty hard to get a handle on it, but it's definitely something worth thinking about and continuing to be mindful of.
That's it for me.
All right, thank you. And next is Councilmember Twist.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and all of the answers. I have just two, hopefully pretty quick things here. On one of the slides, it was page 7, it was water sources for the potable system. You had 2 columns of current versus future, right? And I just want to make sure that I'm understanding the percentages versus actual amounts that we're talking about. In the future scenario, Windy Gap is a significant portion. Do you foresee us having so much Windy Gap water that we actually need less Denver water or direct CBT water? Or is this just how we meet our future demand, but we still get the same amounts roughly from CBT in Denver? Is that clear?
Yeah. Thank you, Councilmember Twist. That I think you nailed it. So it's mostly that we're going to do this, I think, in the update in April, but we didn't provide the specifics of the water demand forecast, but we do expect it to go up. I think it's about 30% between now and 2050. So that's not really shown in these. This is more about the percentage of water we're getting from each of those sources. That increase is largely going to be met by the expansion of Windy Gap and the amount of water we're getting from Windy Gap. I think we'll still get about the same amount in most years from CBT and about the same amount in most years from Denver water.
Okay, thank you. One other quick thing about the Becky property. I'm just curious if anyone has explored any type of a lease or IGA situation with Erie while Broomfield maintains ownership of the property itself.
To my knowledge, that has not been part of our conversation. Have you?
No.
Anything like that?
No, we haven't had any conversations around a lease at all. Erie we've been 3 entities really have approached us. Town of Erie, which wants to use it more for our water supply facility. Boulder County, they want to keep it ag, an open space area. And then there's some residents around there that also want to keep it ag and are interested in purchasing parts of it. that's really where the big driving force for those entities is they want to control that
Mhm.
outcome
Yeah.
a little bit.
Are the current conversations coming from Erie approaching us or the other way around?
They approached us 2018, 2019 originally. We've had a couple different attorneys representing the private property owners that have been contacting us over the last couple of years, wanting to know the availability of it. And then, of course, every now and then we get a little feedback from Boulder County on what's our intentions. But that's where the town of Erie's conversation initiated with their first interest. And as we formulated our plans, we did reach back out and said, yeah, I think we're in a position now to engage and talk a little bit more with you about your plans.
Thank you. As far as direction goes, my gut instinct would be if we have anything with water, that we would keep it for future uses, just knowing what the uncertainty and what's coming down the road. But I am not opposed to exploring options with Erie. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Delgadillo.
Thank you for the presentation. No questions. My direction is the same as Mayor Pro Tem Lim. Thank you.
Thank you. Did anyone else, everyone got to provide directions? Councilmember Hinkle had to leave the call. She was not feeling well. So I guess, my concern is obviously, we don't allow oil and gas injection wells in the city and county of Broomfield. And I know Erie's had a lot of fracking as well. So that would be my concern, is that if there is water on that property, it doesn't really make sense to allow any type of toxic chemicals to be injected into that supply. So that's my 2 cents on it. I don't know if there's value in keeping it, but the value has gone up considerably since the purchase, correct?
Yeah, the land value has increased, as Deputy Director Laurie has indicated that the water value has also increased, which we're keeping.
Right.
So we bought the land and the water for 3.7 million, give or take a little. And now that water is valued about 15.2 million, and that's what we're keeping.
The water's not part of the deal.
So
Okay.
that water is not part of the deal. We're keeping that water, the CBT water. And realistically, reducing some of our risks for maintaining that property and providing Erie with an opportunity to beneficially reuse that area.
As long as there's no chance of our water being contaminated, I think it
Okay.
sounds reasonable.
We will proceed with that direction.
Okay.
Could I ask a quick question?
Sure, Councilmember Cohen.
I didn't realize earlier there were other bidders or other interested parties. Would it be possible just to get a memo that explains why are you favoring Erie versus Boulder versus, I forget what the other one was?
Direct neighbors.
Okay, there's 3 interested parties, right?
The
It'd be
residents
just
are,
helpful to know why you're pursuing Erie versus why we might rather.
can provide you a
Boulder.
summary, yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Anyone else? Do you have good direction then to proceed?
Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much for the first installment, and we'll be staying tuned for more. So thank you all. Thank you for the conversation, council. That concludes the agenda items for this evening's study session. Is there any other business to come before the council from my colleagues or staff? Seeing none, the study session is adjourned.